I was essentially living a lie. Nobody really knew what was going on internally. For the majority of my life, I couldn't even be honest, let alone vulnerable with myself, let alone to anyone else. And that caused me immense suffering.
So externally, you had all this success. Internally, you were suffering.
Yes. And the reason why this was the toughest moment was because I could no longer say, when I get there, that's when I'll be happy. I couldn't fantasize about this better moment because I'd literally had everything I wanted.
What is the link between self-worth and success?
Massively intertwined. For the longest time, I didn't even know self-worth was a thing. And truly, when I understood what self-worth was, it was during my first ayahuasca experience. When I went and sat with Mother Aya, and she took me through the roughest ride of my life. Physically painful, emotionally painful, mentally painful, spiritually painful. It was complete disillusion of myself. This was one of the most pivotal points of my life. I realized that I had very little self-worth. Your worth is not defined by what you've done in this human plane. You are worthy for being born. That in itself gives it inherent worth. And at the time, I couldn't accept that. I could not accept that I could be worthy just for being.
Tell me what you learned about vulnerability.
It is strength. It's true strength. Vulnerability equals strength.
Today's guest is an entrepreneur, mindset coach, spiritual seeker, and the founder of Quantum Mind, a mastermind that helps people unplug from the matrix and transform their inner state. His mission is to raise the consciousness of 1 million entrepreneurs. Please welcome Ebrahim Cherner.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on, man. I thought a good place to start would be to delve into your spiritual journey. I'm curious, was there any hints or clues early on in your life that told you there was more to reality than meets the eye?
There were multiple moments. What's interesting with me is I actually did have spiritual influence growing up because my mum was always into like yoga. She's a yoga teacher. My dad is very religious. He's a Muslim. And so I would see the way in which they would live and always notice that they were living by a different set of guidelines to what it seemed like the rest of society. It seemed like they had some kind of internal guidance system that they were running by. And I always found that was interesting. But when I was probably around 8 or 9 years old, my parents gave me the option. They said, okay, would you like to be like Christian or would you like to be like Muslim?
So your mom was Christian, your dad was Muslim.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I said, okay, cool. What would a creator do in this situation? Well, a creator sees limitless opportunities. And I said, I would like to be neither. Thank you. And I just became non-religious. And they were both cool with that. I was very, very fortunate to have parents who were very understanding. They just always, they gave me independent reign on my own life, which is probably the biggest gift I think a parent can give, which I know a lot of people don't get. So I had that spiritual influence there. I remember when The Secret came out. I couldn't tell you the year, but I remember it being this huge thing. I was quite young at the time and just thinking, what a load of rubbish. I just saw these people, sitting and thinking and, everything's just going to everything's just going to come to fruition. It's all going to happen. And my mom really followed that and she was really into it. So I just moved so far away from that. So the spiritual influence was I was actually against it to start with. Yet I knew it was always part of me. So it was really interesting because it didn't come from necessarily a positive perspective. It came from the opposite. And ultimately, there are many, many moments. We can go so many places. I mean, I know you like to talk about mushrooms and things like that. That was definitely a moment which changed my life. So fast forward to 18 years old, I go to Amsterdam with some friends, and I would still define this as pre-spiritual awakening.
So at that point where you said you're non-religious,
Yep.
Were you spiritual at all?
Nope.
Or
Nope.
more like just objective-minded, everything 3D?
I was in the 3D. I knew I wanted some kind of good life. I had ambition.
Hmm.
I was a good person, etc. I don't even like the term good person, but
Not like now.
I was I was just I was just going living what you would imagine a normal 18-year-old dude. I was interested in women, I was interested in going out partying, and so I went to Amsterdam with some friends. And one of my friends suggested, "Oh, why don't we try some mushrooms?" And they were actually truffles, but I remember going into a shop and they had them all laid out. And I still remember the ones I had. They were called Dolphin Delights, and
It's an epic name.
yeah, great, right? And it's supposed to be this like kind of happy, uplifting experience. And dude, I was so scared. I was so scared. I'd never taken. I don't think I'd ever taken a drug.
What was your experience or what was your opinion of psychedelics at that point?
I hadn't really formed one yet. It was more. I understood that you could see some different things. Like I
Hmm.
had no. There was no research. There was no prior understanding. There was no reverence for them at this point. And I ended up having them. I passed out instantly whilst on the toilet. So I felt like I needed to shit myself whilst passing out. I woke up. My head was like this on the toilet roll in the bathroom, and then I was in the experience,
Full on tripping?
full on tripping. What it showed me was that there is clearly a different world to the one I had currently been experiencing up until this moment. I didn't know what it wasn't. It wasn't a conscious experience, but I knew okay, there is something else because I'm in it, and that flipped the switch in my brain. And for many years after that, I would always look back to that moment of saying like, wow, I've seen things, I've felt things, I've I know there's more. And then at that point, it got parked because the problem with this, and I think the thing is with any plant medicines, is it really all comes down to the intentionality when you use them. What is the space? Who is guiding it? If you even have a guide, right? A lot of
Mm.
people just use them recreationally, like I did, which I really don't recommend most of the time. And so that was the first moment, and it was unconscious, right? I just fell into it. But I'm so grateful for that because even though it wasn't an ideal situation, right? It wasn't like, the Buddha had guided me from the bottom of the mountain upwards. It still opened up that gateway.
Right. Yeah. It's like once you see something, you can't unsee it.
Yes.
And what you saw in that experience was the reality of other planes of existence.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ego dissolving momentarily. And
Mhm.
that felt so freeing to not be associated with my thoughts, even though in that experience, for anyone who's done any kind of plant medicine, you feel resistance, right? And it's really a big part of it is being able to just surrender to that resistance. I remember that when I finally did that, that was when, I could just feel the bliss for doing nothing. And that was a key moment.
Was there a desire to go back to mushrooms after that first trip? Or you sort of, like you said, you parked it for.
Yeah. The reason why was because I parked it because one, it was actually a really rough ride to get to like when I like passed out and etc. Um it was tough for me. Um and it probably wasn't until 6 7 years later that I went back, but we'll get to that. But that was essentially like coming from a completely different consciousness. Um Not just, some guys in Amsterdam doing it for fun. Very different.
So would you say that was your first spiritual experience, the mushrooms?
It was one of them. It was one of them there. Another one was really just the recognition when I started meditating, probably around that time, getting to a point of stillness where I started to observe my thoughts. That was probably one of the other key moments, realizing that, oh, I'm not these thoughts. Because I just thought I was my thoughts, right? And I think anyone listening, you're not your thoughts, right? If somebody asked you, are you your thoughts? You would say no. But do you actually know that? Because those thoughts are going around, between 7,000 and 40,000 times a day, depending on which study you look at. And it's really easy to associate with them.
Yeah.
Really, really easy. And so that recognition, this is a lot of what I talk about is embodiment. And it's the difference between just knowing something intellectually and actually having the experience and it being in your body, right? It being a shift that happens internally. Those are the moments for me where they can be like, you can call it a spiritual experience, right? And they don't have to be these grandiose moments. They can be very, very simple, just like that recognition I just said.
So you have the shroom experience and then you park it for a few years. What was the next step in your spiritual journey?
Hmm. In my spiritual journey, so alongside this, I'm now like going into university. I'm pursuing like economics. My plan is to go and be a banker, as in the Matrix as you can possibly be. Like I couldn't think of anything more in the Matrix unless I put on a suit and the glasses and just became Agent Smith, right?
Yeah.
Um, so along this time, I'm starting to read just alternative books. I'm starting to just do my own self study. But what's interesting is like spirituality and business have always been two sides of the same coin for me. They've always been very interlocked. Like even meditation, which has many, many different purposes and benefits. One of them, you could say, is focus, right? Which directly helps with business. So I was always doing these things with the goal of wanting to just improve myself so I could be more productive, right? And so once I started to see the physical benefits in the 3D world of like, okay, I go meditate, I'm now more focused, I now do better in business, I now get, more out of the other side. That started to really re-entrain it for me. And then circling back to those when The Secret came out days, that started to like rewire things for me because now I could see, okay, what's the benefit in the 3D? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a lot of people, I know so many guys who are just closed off to spirituality because they think it's just, sitting, meditating, singing kumbaya, which for some people it is, right? We're in Bali, right? So,
Yeah.
like, and that's cool. Like, I have total love and respect for those people. It's just not my path. Like, my path is building like big businesses because not just for the sake of it, it's because it's what I love to do and it's in line with service. So when we were talking beforehand and I said, business and spirituality are one and the same, business really is a spiritual game.
Yeah, when you said that, that really was like, ooh, like it kind of woke something up in me.
Yeah.
So explain that. Business is a spiritual game.
Yeah.
You don't see it as a money game or uh, a
Why isn't money a spiritual game?
mm. So do you see money in a spiritual sense?
100%.
Okay, let's dive into that.
Yeah.
Like let's say someone is broke
Yep.
and they're doing financially poorly.
Hmm.
How can they turn their situation around? Would you go the spiritual route? Would you tell them to hustle and grind? What is the where's the line?
It's a good there's different times for different things, right? So there's a reason why if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the bottom of it, you've got like your basic necessities like food, water, shelter. Bottom of the pyramid, you just need these things to survive. Air, right? You need that. Then a couple levels above that, maybe you've got like relationships, maybe you've got like your health, and then above that, as you go up, you get towards like self-actualization, which is spirituality, right? There is a reason why for a lot of people, most people don't have their spiritual awakening until 35 years old on average, right? And you could look at different numbers, but it's around that time. There's a reason for that. It's because by that time, you've usually got your basic necessities figured out. And once you've got that, right, and think about it from a spiritual perspective, all of that safety, that security, that's all very like root chakra based, right? It's that grounded, just foundation that you need. And for most people, when that's out of balance, right, that's the bottom of the pyramid. So everything else is just going to come collapsing down like a house of cards until you've got that right. So I'm not going to go tell someone who's completely broke just to sit there and meditate and do mushrooms. They need to go out and actually like get themselves together, take responsibility from where they are, accept where they are, which to me is all spiritual, by the way, because acceptance is and surrender, is key to the spiritual journey. It's so it is going on a spiritual journey. It's just, you know, you might just kind of classify it differently, but to me, it's all one and the same
Mm.
because look, okay, what is the 5D, right? One of the things of being in the 5D is where everything is interconnected, right? It's oneness.
Define the 5D for those listening.
Yeah. So to me personally, so you've got like the 3D, you've got the 5D. 3D is very much like, you could think of it as like the matrix, very like ego-centered, separation, material. You're kind of out for yourself. You're competing. Oh, you've got this podcast. That guy's doing a podcast behind us. Like, you need to get better numbers than that guy, right? Very, very
Very ego driven.
ego driven,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's where I would probably say the majority of like consciousness is right now. And then you've got the 5D, right? Which seems like this magical, like unicorn wonderland, but to me, it's really just, it's love, right? It's oneness, it's connectedness, it's collaboration, it's coming together to essentially raise the collective consciousness, right? And like, you can have experiences that open up the gateway to the 5D. For example, like mushrooms, right? Is like literally like unlocking a door and saying, "Oh, here's the 5D," right? If you want to like a quick way to get there, if you're looking for a hack, that's probably one of the few ones, right?
I call them like cheat codes in the video game.
Yep.
So they're planted all around the video game, and you always hear about them, so you can't miss it. And it's up to the person if they want to look at the source code behind the video game.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, and look, those mushrooms, like in the video game, they're grown, right? Mother Nature, Gaia provides them for us for a reason, right? And it's whether we choose to use them or not, right? And you can go way deep. We can talk for hours about like the specific nuances of it, but you kind of get the idea, right? One is driven by fear. The 3D one is driven by love, ultimately, right? And love doesn't just mean like cuddles, unicorns, and rainbows, right? Love means like taking responsibility. Love means doing things that are hard. Love means cutting people out and putting yourself first. And this is, for me, the way I look at this is like masculinity comes into it a lot as well. And that just doesn't mean men, that means men and women. Like, there's a real part of love that is very, very firm. And that also exists in the 5D, right?
How would a broke person,
Yeah.
if they wanted to do it in a spiritual way,
Yeah.
and they wanted to turn their life around and their financial situation around, what is a spiritual path that they could take
To me, the ultimate spiritual path, what it comes down to is surrender. Because if you can surrender to the moment, truly surrender, and just what does that mean? It basically just means being okay where you are, to me. On a written basic terms, it means just whatever is, there's a hurricane going on behind us and you're still okay. That's the deepest level of surrender. Because my secret is when people ask like, oh, like, how do you do this? How do you do that? I'm just like, I just don't mind what happens.
You do have a very detached energy, but in a good way of like, I can see that nothing really bothers you or nothing really perturbs you.
So things bother me. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of things that get under my skin, right? All the matrix stuff that infuriates me. The thing is, I used to define myself as, oh, I'm not an angry guy. That's just not me. That is a lack of acceptance and surrender. Because here's the thing, right? I used to view anger as bad, or view being frustrated as bad, quote unquote. But why is that frequency any worse than love? Who am I to judge it, right? God, whoever you believe in, the creator of the universe, gave us this orchestra of different frequencies and emotions we can feel inside of us and play with. When we go to you go to an orchestra, right? And you go, oh, how was it? How was the orchestra? And you go, oh, it was so sad. I just cried the whole way through. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're going to cry and feel sad. Surely that's not a good thing. No, it was beautiful though. And you're convincing me, right? So inherently, we actually want to feel everything, because without the love, without the bliss, without the joy, without the gratitude, then, Like we need both sides,
For
right?
sure,
We
for
need
sure.
the apathy, the fear, the grief. We need to be able to feel that because we work in that dualistic way. It's how our minds were built. To me, it's like acceptance of where you are is the deepest spiritual journey because it's the hardest thing to do, and there are so many levels to it, right?
Mhm.
You the more you go on the spiritual journey, um, it's easy to bypass, right? It's easy to, and I went through a period of that when I was like, last year, anyone who knows me was the year I became a woman. What do I mean? What do I mean by that? I was just so in the feminine, so in flow, so just a leaf in the wind, surrendering all day, every day. Everything was falling apart in the 3D around me. Businesses were falling apart, relationships were falling apart. I had no idea where I was going. I lost 12 kilograms. But I was in the flow, right? So you need, yeah, you need both.
And what
You need
did
both.
that teach you for this year? Are you now more balanced with
Yeah.
not as much surrender, or how do you actually balance something like surrender?
So I do think it can differ from between men and women, actually. I do think it can differ. I think I view surrender as a feminine quality, as a feminine frequency, because by default, you're allowing something to happen. It's not like a penetrative force, right? It's you have to, and I think this is why men particularly can find it harder than women. If you talk to the average woman, like they generally are like, oh, just let it go, right? You could like you've got some big problem, in your business, and you're thinking about it, and you come home to your girlfriend or whoever. She's like, oh, it's fine, just let it go. She's nurturing. She can
Mm.
just easily just be like, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it, right? Whereas like as the man, you're like, no, like
It's got to be this way. It's got
ex-
to happen this way.
exactly. So in everything, in every single moment of life, there is an opportunity to surrender. Can you be okay with the angle being slightly off in this podcast after and fully just let that go? Right? This is why business is a spiritual game because it's the integration of these spiritual modalities into life, into every single moment, that to me is the highest spiritual path. Because I did that. I spent that year being fully detached out in the mountain meditating all the time, and that was great. It was lovely. But what actually happened? Like, what did I like achieve physically? You know, not that much. So that balance is key, right? And this is why I like to use opportunities in day to day life to surrender. Like I'll give you a perfect example, right? So moved into this new villa in Canggu, beautiful place. On the day we were meant to move, the agent comes and says, "Oh, sorry, it's not available anymore. We've like paid, etc." We're literally moving from Uluwatu, which is like South Bali, up into Canggu. But don't worry, we've got this other one available. Oh, how much is it? It's kind of big. It looks, looks kind of nice. Oh, it's the same. Okay, cool. We get there. Staff of 6 people, greet
Mhm.
us. The contract says a completely different number. It's like 3 times the amount to what we paid, right? Oh, don't worry, it's fine. Like we've spoken to the owner. Cool. Okay. Turns out this woman is an international scammer, and it all kind of this whole like tumble of lies gets figured out, right? And we have to leave this villa. Police are getting called. I also had barley belly during all of this, which I'm still recovering from. Um,
The timing of that, right?
yeah, and a whole host of other things, right? And it tends to I've noticed it tends to happen that way, right? Um, so all these things are happening, right? And so this is where you ask, okay, how do you how do you, if you want to get out of situation, if you want to go from being broke, how do you incorporate the spiritual journey into that? That's the opportunity right there in that moment. Do you decide to go into fight or flight, fear mode, victim mentality, all 3D? Or do you choose to see the higher perspective? Do you choose to see the opportunity in that moment? And, chose to see the opportunity in that moment, figured it all out. Everything was fine, you
So
know?
how did you figure it out?
So obviously there's the physical 3D part, right? Of like having the right conversations, knowing, being able to negotiate and all these things, right? So there's all that side of it. But the interesting part to me is the bit before that. The interesting part is, okay, well, what state was I in? And this is the key thing, right? My number one asset is my state, because that's the thing I'll invest most into, right? Into being, and like I always say, internal state equals external reality, right? And we can go deeper into that. But in that moment, I know there's a whole host of things that need to be dealt with. So the question is, do I come from this like tensed, fearful state of like thinking about all the worst case scenarios, or do I just first of all process the situation internally, take some time, relax through it, let it go, surrender to it, and then approach it from that state, right? And then guess what? That's when the solutions came. That's when we were able to figure out what's actually what even is going on, right? Because before that point, we didn't even know we were getting scammed. So it's always state first in these situations, that is the point where you are most resourceful. When you work on your own state first, that's when you're able to tap into resource, creativity, figure out solutions. So this is exactly how you get out of that state of being broke, right? When you're in that state, you're not going to want to hear, oh, just go and meditate and surrender. You're going to say like, F off, I need to make money, right? And yes, while I agree, equally, if you're doing that from a state of tension and fear, you're only going to attract more of that. You're only going to create situations that reflect that. And I did this, right? I'll give you a perfect example. When I started my first marketing agency out of university, so I was in my final year, I would have been like 21 ish, roughly, something like that. Why did I start that business? Well, I wanted freedom and I wanted external freedom, I should say, right? So like time, finance, location, right? Not, I didn't know what internal freedom was at that point, which is a completely different thing, which we can talk about. Um, and I wanted to escape the 9 to 5. I wanted to escape that whole matrix arc of working in a job. I saw all my friends doing 7 interviews to try and get a job at some bank, only to get rejected, who are way more intellectual than me, way smarter than me, way more capable in that field. And I thought, what? Like, and I had this opportunity. I'd put 5 years into this degree, into pursuing this field of finance, and I didn't even apply for a single job. And like my friends were like, "What are you doing? That's correct. You've just invested all of this energy and money. Like it's a ton of
Is
money. It's a ton of money, right?"
is it because you knew that you were going to be an entrepreneur at that point?
It's because I knew I didn't want to go down that path.
Okay.
And so here's the thing, and a lot of people do that, right? A lot of people go into entrepreneurship because they just don't want to go in the 9 to 5. Like that's the matrix, right? Forget that. And I think most people that's what they want. But here's the thing: that's still fear. It's still fear of. It's still separation. It's still resistance,
Mm.
right? And so I brought that fear-based energy into my business unconsciously. And so, guess what? That doesn't go until it's processed. It doesn't go until it's let go of. And so, well, then what happened is as I would build my business, I would get more clients. I remember this was a couple of years ago, like built this agency, was, did did the multiple six-figure agency, like what everyone online seems to want, right? And I remember being in Greece and I was sitting on top of my Airbnb, 3 bedrooms, locked down, no one was there, like you were talking about Bali. Beautiful, right? Glass of wine, watching the sunset, just the most beautiful moment. And internally, I was riddled with fear and anxiety that everything was just going to fall apart, right? I was just in this fear state constantly, and I couldn't really figure out why I was so scared.
Where do you think that was coming from?
It was coming from the fact that I brought this fear energy into the business. I
Mm.
hadn't. This is the thing, like the external was say here, but my identity in my internal world was here. I hadn't done the inner work to match it to where I was externally, and so that the internal world will always win. It will always find a way to self-sabotage, to find a way to bring it back down to where you think you should be, right? Because you reality is essentially a reflection of your thoughts and feelings, right? Your internal state, essentially. It just sometimes takes a little while to catch up, right?
So externally, you had all this success. You were sitting at the rooftop of this Airbnb, beautiful view. Internally, you were suffering
Yes.
and also fearful.
fearful. And the reason why this was one of the like the toughest moments was because I could no longer say when I get there, that's when I'll be happy. I couldn't fantasize about this better moment because I'd literally had everything I wanted externally, all the things
The money, the
yeah, yeah,
penthouse.
all of that.
Yeah.
I had it. I was living that reality. And what was funny is I was on the way here this morning, and I was on my scooter, beautiful sunny day, on the way to come and do this podcast, and I was just like, I just had this little moment to myself where I just had a little smile because I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly the reality that I'd been like creating internally for like the last couple months, and here we are,
Huh.
like exactly it, right? And it's beautiful to have those moments because it's just always good confirmation, right?
There's always a little bit of a delay, right?
There's always a delay.
So it's interesting when you finally reach that 3D point and you're like, oh yeah, this is what I was intending 3 months ago, 2 months ago.
Yep. And I like to put everything into equations. So my equation for creation is having a clear intention,
Mhm.
right? So just this is what I want to happen, like physically, like I'm, thinking this in my mind, plus aligned action. This is where it differs from The Secret. It takes action.
Yep.
It takes action. It takes action. Aligned action minus attachment.
Mm.
And this was the bit I figured out afterwards. It's minus attachment. You have to take away the attachment to the outcome. That's that is the secret to having any reality you want. Because what happens is when you have the attachment on it, right? Like I did with this business. This is the perfect example, actually. I didn't even realize this, right? I had this vision of wanting this business, who that made me in society, and the life I could live and what I could provide, etc. But I was so attached to needing that to happen that it was always creating a gap between me and that thing. And I momentarily had it. And in this moment in time, I had it. But here's the thing. I created a scenario where it all came toppling down. Within 48 hours, half of my client base cancelled, seemingly out of nowhere for no reason, right? And the funniest thing is I was smiling inside. I was laughing. The only thing I could do was laugh. Like worst case scenario in my mind had just happened, and all I could do was laugh because I was like, oh yeah, I created this.
Yeah, I heard you talk about how, like, in the few days leading up to that, you were actually scared that you were going to lose your clients.
Yep.
And then only took a few days and the exact manifestation happened.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're always manifesting stuff, right?
Mhm.
Every single moment. But no one wants to pay attention to the things we're manifesting that we don't want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is why when we talk about like manifestation and spirituality, it's all beautiful stuff and the intention's beautiful, but it requires releasing of all programming, all like held traumas first, because otherwise you're just manifesting shit you don't want. And so that's why it takes that inner work. And that's why I don't even like in my mastermind, like I don't even share a lot of those like techniques and things yet because I want to make sure we've like cleaned everything out first, right? So then you can manifest from a pure state because otherwise you're manifesting with distortions, right? Manifesting based on ego. And you can do that, but it's just
It's clearing those blocks, right?
exactly.
Doing the inner work.
Yeah. It's easier to just like let go of the rubber band, right? You always hear that rubber band or slingshot analogy. It's so much easier just to like let it go and
Uh-huh.
just you get the slingshot effect forward.
So
Yeah.
I'll circle back to the clearing the blocks.
Sure.
I'd love to jump into your story going from 3D to 5D, going from, losing all your clients to going on this spiritual journey.
Mm.
Because we talked a little bit about it last week and I found it so fascinating. Would you do the honor of telling us the story of, this whole journey that you went on?
Yeah. God. So what's interesting I've noticed with any spiritual journey is it's so non-linear, right? It and you can explain it in a linear way, but the reality is these things happen in such a a crazy and chaotic way. But that's the only way it can happen because by default, anything in that realm is non-logical, right? You're moving into like what I perceive as moving with intuition. You move from matter to energy, right? That's a big shift, right? That was one of the big shifts I had, which I guess I can start with there, which is like knock on this table. You would say it's a wooden table, physically made of wood, right? Well, what's that wood made of? It's atoms, right? What are those atoms made of? Well, they're 99% space. What's inside that space?
Energy.
Right? Yeah. So this was a really big shift for me when I started to. This was when I started to perceive the world energetically and start to look at things energetically. And this just a lot of this stuff, there is plenty of science to this. And I went down the scientific route, like people like Joe Dispenza starting to understand like quantum physics a little bit more. This stuff's only been around for 100 years, right? That's when it was essentially born, all of this new science. And some of it's even newer than that. So I mean, science is always evolving, right? So to me, like there are no absolute truths. I mean, there are some absolute truths, like gravity, for example, but there are very few absolute truths. And so with this, it's constantly evolving. That was one of the first big shifts. It was viewing the world from matter to energy. So, we are energetic beings. Why are we here right now, right? If we had, sure, our stories were interesting and we got along from that perspective, but on a different plane, energetically, we vibed. Well, what does that even mean, right? Like, oh, I like this person's vibes. Well, vibe is short for vibration, right? Right now,
It's like matching frequencies.
exactly. So I started to really go down that route of just viewing things energetically and saying, okay, well, if let's take for example, right? I choose to work with someone or not. So previously in the 3D, I would say I spent 100K on self-education courses, all that kind of stuff, right? I'd be like, does this person have the results I want? Yes, work with them. No, not work with them. That was the filtering mechanism I would use. Now, from a 5D perspective, that is, yes, still one of the criteria, but way above that is, first of all, do I feel love from this person? Do I feel kindness from this person? And that is like, that's like, I'll have that force field essentially around us. And intertwining the energy with that, we have energy fields around us, right? Auras, torus fields. Like they're explained in many different ways. So we all physically have this. And I'd highly recommend, dude, if you've never had your energy field like tested, I don't know if you knew that's possible or anything like that, but I had this done where basically there was this machine created by accident by these two Russian scientists, as good as a story can get. And they basically created this machine that can measure energy fields. Okay. And so it's basically you hold on to these two metal grips, and then there's a camera, and basically you can see your aura. And so that was like a shift as well for me, because for the first time I could see, and then somebody interpreted that you could see all the colors, all the different chakras, where they were residing, and it's a snapshot in time of what your current energy is like.
So you've done this.
I've done this, yeah.
You have photos of
I have
this?
photos, yeah.
Wow, I'd love
Yeah.
to see those.
I can send you one.
Can you like take for example, can you go back to this machine now and compare your aura
Yep.
now to what it was
Yeah.
before?
100%.
Have
yeah.
you done that?
Well, here's the thing, your aura is always changing in every moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so your aura is a reflection of what's happening in the present moment. So it's always moving, right? Your aura isn't stagnant, right? But you would definitely, like, if you were to measure the aura of someone who's like enlightened versus someone who's very much in the 3D, you would see the humongous difference, right? Heart coherence, how open is, you can see, like, I could see how open my third eye was, which for me it was very open. They were surprised by that. A lot of like root chakra, so there's a lot of red. So like I'm a very grounded person, right? So to link this back to like 3D, like most people will say, oh, you seem like a very grounded person, or you seem pretty detached from things. You could say that's like a personality trait. From a 5D perspective, from a spiritual perspective, my root chakra is very like open. It's very just like solid, you know? Um, and that's been something that is just naturally within my genetics. It's within my, like, I'm a Virgo. It's part of my like astrology. It's part of my like human design. You can use all of these different modalities for confirmation of this. But yeah, essentially, like, viewing the world energetically was one of those big shifts, right? And I just got super excited by the prospect that we are all energetic beings, right? And then I would start to have experiences. So I would start to, I would work with, for example, like, there's a quantum kinesiologist that I work with called Beth, and she's worked with so many of my friends now. Every time I introduce her to someone, I go, "Hey, this is Beth. I have no idea what she does, but she's amazing. Just, you guys need to work together, and the mind will be blown." To give like some context, right? So imagine she's connected to source energy. Okay, she's completely just connected. And imagine you're an open book, and I'm just reading you, like, your entire past, all timelines, all future possibilities. And I'm just reading you. And how do you know this is true and not some made up stuff? Because one, like, the things that are said are 100% accurate, but then two, you just feel it, right? You feel it in your body. And this is really the movement from the 3 to the 5D. This is probably one of the biggest areas of resistance for people, is because you do move from the logical mind and start to incorporate the heart, the feeling body. And this is really where, you know, it's completely against everything that's been programmed into society by the Matrix, right? Feeling like, oh, don't cry, big boys don't cry, just get over it, be a man. All of this external programming is saying do not feel. Feeling is weak, right? You go to any boardroom, that, like, locker room talk, like, don't be a bitch, don't be a pussy. All of this stuff is saying don't feel. Essentially, like, feelings for women. So to be able to lean into that takes the removal of all of that conditioning. And this is why I like to always bring it back down to, the street, bring it back down into the 3D, and to show, well, here's the benefit of doing that. Here's how you have a physical, better life. Here's what you can access
Yeah.
by going into that.
It's like integration too, right? Because if you can integrate the 5D perspective with the 3D, I feel like that's the healthiest way of seeing the world, because we are living in a 3D
Yeah,
uh, universe, at least at this moment. And so just being in the 5D can be a little bit like floaty, like you're not grounded. Whereas when you bring it back to the 3D, you can have both perspectives.
for sure. Like, why do you think you came here to this Earth, not to this podcast? Why do you think? Why do you think you came to Earth from your perspective?
I've thought about this a lot, and I've also asked ayahuasca about it when I was doing my first ceremony. So I think purpose-wise, I came here to uh, raise the consciousness of humanity, and also uh, introduce plant medicine to more people. And that's a big part of my mission.
Hmm.
But there is also a part of me that feels like that we come here to just have fun as well. Like, that it's a fun experience to become human for 60, 70, 80 years. And so um, part of me just thinks like we come here many times to experience life, learn lessons, go back. It's like a school. But why do you ask?
I think moving into, as you go on the spiritual journey, it can be easy just to want to be, in service, just to want to be in the 5D, just to want to help people.
Uh-huh.
And whilst that is beautiful, it needs to be balanced with having a 3D grounded human experience and experiencing everything that comes with that. Because otherwise, you're denying part of your existence. So it's beautiful that you feel there's both. Equally, you can be too far on the other end, which is just having that 3D experience, right? And denying the spirit within.
Mhm. And so let me take you back to that the you're in Greece. Was that like one of the toughest times for you in life?
Yeah, it was. It was definitely one of the toughest times. There were other times as well where I was like struggle financially. Like, that was a big part of my journey as well. I think it's for a lot of guys. finances, right? Scarcity is one of the things programmed into the 3D, right?
It's
This,
also because men define themselves by money so
yeah,
much.
self-worth.
Mm,
We can talk about self-worth as well because
yeah.
it's hugely tied to money typically.
What is the link between self-worth and success and self-worth and money?
It's massive, massively intertwined. And when I realized this, when I realized that the guys who are most successful have very high self-worth, even if it's not warranted self-worth,
Mm.
yet they're still successful. I was like, okay, there's something I get to figure out here, right? But how can I do this in an integrated way? So for the longest time, I didn't even know self-worth was a thing. I didn't even, if you ask, the first time I heard about it was I was at university in our enterprise center. So it's like our business center. And the head of enterprise name was Finbar, said, one of the things I think young entrepreneurs struggle with is self-worth. And that was the first time I heard self-worth. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's like what you what you're worth? Like, is that financial worth or like what is that, right?
Yeah.
But it planted the seed. And truly, when I understood what self-worth was, it wasn't even that many years ago. It was during my first ayahuasca experience. It was when I went and sat with Mother Aya, and she took me through the roughest ride of my life. It was deeply physically painful, emotionally painful, mentally painful, spiritually painful. It was complete disillusion of myself. And I realized after going through this experience, and I remember laying on my side, right? You usually lay on like a mat or a blanket or something. And I remember I was in the fetal position and I was just covered by this blanket, by this white, thin blanket. And I remember opening my eyes. It was the morning after. And I just remember feeling so fragile. I felt like if you just touched me, I would have just shattered. It felt like all of the layers of armor, of protection, of ego had just been fully removed.
Mm.
And as I got out of that blanket, it was like being reborn, like a little baby bird. And I just remember I've got goosebumps on my arms right now. You can probably see. This was one of the most pivotal points in my life because I realized that I had very little self-worth. And it was a scary moment because my ego was saying, what do you mean? You've got plenty of things to be worthy for. You should be worthy for this. You're this person. And it was all external. I didn't even feel I was with some friends and an ex at the time. I didn't feel worthy of even having those relationships with those people. And the shaman, who's incredible, his name's Anthony, one of just beautiful soul, explained to me what that was and what self-worth was. And we used that as the talking point for the whole group. And that was where the healing journey began of self-worth, of realizing that what he said to me was that your worth is not defined by what you've done in this human plane. You are worthy for being born. That in it itself gives it inherent worth. And at the time, I couldn't accept that. I could not accept that I could be worthy just for being. I think particularly in men, I think it's slightly different with men and women. I think women can accept that a little bit easier, but as a man, there is an element where we do create our own value, right? There's a real thing to that, right? Through building, through creating, through becoming more intelligent so that we can do things. There's a real part to that, right? So that part which I knew then and still do believe to be true, that we do create our own value, couldn't accept the self-worth part. How could I be worthy if I'm like laying back
Just for being born.
just for being born, right? Well, how does that give me any worth, right? So it's a bit of a dichotomy.
And so, how did you come to understand that?
It was a journey. It was a real journey. I would say one of the pivotal moments was working with another shaman, funnily enough, not in plant medicine. I worked with someone called a Heyoka, which is essentially means sacred clown. And we went through this process to, which he would describe as trauma release, essentially going back to moments in the past and going through a specific process to release them energetically, which I did. And I realized that so many of the things that had caused me pain, whether it was a heartbreak, whether it was, my parents splitting up, my dad leaving and me grabbing onto his leg, not wanting him to leave and feeling unworthy as that little child, all these micro moments that build up this use case to create the illusion that I was not worthy, I was able to let them go. And I was able to do that myself. I was able to do that by self processing it, by allowing the energy to pass, because essentially the way these things are created is just simply by the mind, so the memory, repeating that memory in the mind, which then causes an emotion in the body. And what is an emotion? It's energy in motion. So it's energy which gets trapped in the body. And that's what causes the lack of self-worth. That's what causes the heartbreak. That's what causes, the resentment to the ex. That's what causes the anger, right?
Stuck energy.
Stuck energy. That's all it is. On the most foundational level, you can use any modality. You can use plant medicine, you can use therapy, you can use going to a retreat, you can use doing 10 days in darkness, you can use any modality. At its core, what's happening is you're just releasing energy. And energy wants to flow. All energy wants to do is flow, can't be created or destroyed. So until we realize that we are the only ones keeping that energy trapped, it is our decision, whether that's a conscious decision or unconscious decision. I would argue it's almost always unconscious. Once we accept that and take responsibility for our own, for our state where we are, then we can say, okay, actually, I can release this now. And that's why for some people, 10 years of therapy to get to the point where they realize that their mom actually did love them or their dad was actually proud of them can be the right path for them. But for me, I'm always like, how can we shortcut this, right? I don't want to spend 10 years. I don't want to go work 50 years. I don't want
Classic entrepreneur.
Yeah, I'm like, we got to figure out a way to do this quicker. And so straight to the root cause, and this is now, he initiated me into this process, and I've developed my own process for this. Because also you got to be at a certain level of consciousness to even be able to do that, right? Anyone can benefit from it, but it helps more when you've developed your own intuition, you've expanded your own consciousness first. And so when I was able to release that, and how do you know when you've released it, Ebrahim? How do you know when you've actually released it, right? God, that's a good question, right? It took me a while to figure this out as well, but here's the scoop. You've released it when it no longer brings up any emotion, any sensation. That's when it's gone, right?
When it's neutral.
When it's neutral, yeah. Mm-hmm. Or even better than that, I can now look back at previous events and traumas, and I like, even now I'm smiling because like I'm laughing. I'm enjoy about them. I'm like, oh wow, that caused me pain for so long. It's funny, right? And this is when I also learned, right? Sacred clown, Hayoka. I'm laughing through this process. I'm having like a beautiful time. I'm literally in pain from my stomach being tense from laughing so much. Like I've literally got those like stitches in my stomach.
So is that why it's called Sacred Clown?
Yeah. I mean, you can Google Hayoka like
Sure.
after to what it actually is, but essentially it's humor is part of that process. For me personally, I do think that there's a time and a place for humor, so I don't always use it going, because I've guided people through the most traumatic things any human can experience to be able to release. And so, I have a very high degree of reverence. There's a time and a place to create certain humorous moments. It very much depends, and that's why, with my mission to want to help millions of people go through this process, I'm still in this process of like figuring out, okay, how do I make this applicable so they don't have to book, to be able to have the finances, first of all, to book a session with me. For then also, the other constraint is for me I can only do so many of these sessions, right? One-on-one. So how can I make this applicable to everybody, right? And that's my current like path, what I'm also working on, right? To be able to make, because everyone can do this. I fully believe everyone can access this ability to release, I don't even like the word trauma, just release, right?
Can you run us through a process of how someone might be able to release trauma?
Yeah.
Is this something someone has to have a guide for, or can they do it
No,
themselves?
you can absolutely do it yourselves, right? Of course, like with anything, right? You get a one-on-one coach in the gym, you're probably going to get different results to if you're just going to the gym for your first time. However, you can absolutely do it, right? And everyone's already doing this, right? When you cry and, from
You're
something hard,
releasing.
you're releasing, right? So, and how do you feel after crying? Right? I have so many girlfriends who are just like, how was your day? Oh, I just spent the morning for the first hour crying, and they're so happy. And I'm like, really? And you're having a good day? They're like, oh, having the best day. What did you do? I just had a controlled cry earlier.
Yeah. Controlled
Yeah,
cry.
one of my friends does that, which I thought was dope.
What is a controlled cry?
Just something. So in this specific example, so she's very busy life, busy job, all these things.
I only have 15 minutes
Exactly.
to cry.
All right, get the tissue box out. Let's go. I've released 40%. All right, I'll do the other 40% when I get back from work. So you can make this as practical as you want, right?
That doesn't sound healthy.
Yeah, I know. But that's the thing. It's meeting people where they're at.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Meeting people where they're
But
at.
it is funny.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious as well. So
She book it in her calendar.
yeah.
Monday, 9 to 9:15.
Yep. Yeah. Any high flying female execs, if you don't have time for letting go, just put it in the calendar. Right?
Oh man, that's funny. so yeah, run me through a process that maybe the listeners can go through if they're feeling stuck energy or trauma that keeps coming up for them.
Yeah. So that's the place to start, right? It's what is coming up, right? That's the place to start, because if you're just curious, that's not a good enough reason, in my experience, right? Curiosity is great and it's good, and I'm a very curious person, but there needs to be a real there needs to be an emotional charge attached to the reason you're doing something. There needs to be a clear intention and purpose, because that's what you're actually going to get out of it. If you're just kind of curious, showing up to something, well, guess what? The results you get are going to be just all right. They're going to be okay, right? So and this is why acceptance is so key, because you got to first of all accept where you are and be like, okay, I'm heartbroken right now, right? And sometimes you can just be lying to yourself, right? I've been in that situation and be like, oh yeah, I've experienced heartbreak a couple times. I'm fine. How you doing? Yeah, I'm good. Just like using this energy for positivity whilst denying that, right? So like heartbreak is a typical great
grief
one.
as
Yeah,
well,
grief.
right? Not allowing oneself to grieve.
Yeah. Or if you've experienced any physical trauma, that can be something that gets really trapped, right? Whether that's when you're younger, these things that you typically really notice yourself pushing down. What's the thing that you find yourself just running away from? And here's the thing: when this event happened originally, let's say it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was stored in the body. So that event, when that happened, let's just use
if you can use a personal example.
Yeah, I'll use a personal example. So I'll use the example of my parents, split up like 7 times when I was growing up. And to me, it was like not weird at all. It was just kind of it was my reality, right? So
7 times that it felt normal to you.
It felt like normal, but not easy, right? So one of the times I remember my dad leaving, he didn't want to leave us. Like, my dad loved my sister and I so deeply, but because of my parents' situation, like, he was leaving, right? They just couldn't do it anymore. And as he was leaving, I was standing in the hallway of my house, and he walked out of the door with his stuff. And I just remember leaving my mum's side, running up to him and grabbing his leg. Okay.
Because you didn't want him to leave.
I didn't want him to leave, right? Yeah. And he actually turned around and stayed. And that was all I wanted, right? And I remember being so like happy's not even the right word. It was just like, oh, okay, like it was like survival. It felt like a survival mechanism. Like, oh,
Mm.
okay, like I've got my protector here, you know?
Relief, probably, as
Yeah.
well.
But from that moment, it was always I always then felt like, hmm, something's off. And I didn't know it was like not, not feeling love, like not feeling worthy at that time. I was just a young kid, right? But I always felt a little bit different after that. So that's an example where, you know, you would say there is like some self-worth to be released, that quote unquote trauma. But it doesn't even matter how it's labeled, because from a again, just going straight down to the root cause, it's energy, right? It's the emotion that is trapped in the body. So let's say, right, in that exact same scenario, dad was leaving, I ran out, grabbed his leg, he then stayed.
Mm.
But I didn't choose to attach any meaning to that. I was like, oh, my dad's staying now. Let's just
Mm.
say that switch was missing in my brain. No trauma created,
No stuck energy.
because it's just an event happening.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. This is like moving from 3D to 5D. Part of that movement is going from, how I always say, like victim to creator. Okay. There is no bad event. There is nothing from a higher perspective. It just is, right? It's the meaning and perception that we give that event.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And only we give it that meaning, consciously or unconsciously. And so in that second scenario where he then stays and I go, oh, cool, dad's staying, and I just move on with my day, right? What happens when you step on your dog's foot? It screeches, it will bark, it will shiver for a moment, it will shake, and 5 seconds later, he's licking your foot again. He's happy,
Mm.
right? Because he's processed it, that he's in the moment. And that's innately like what we can do. We can all do that. And this is why I talk about using life's provocations, situations as opportunities in the moment. I think that's the most powerful, right? So that's how you can start processing right now.
And so, this event with your dad, were you able to process that with the shaman or by yourself later on in life?
It happened in spurts because I didn't have a robust system like I have now to for processing. So part of it also happened during a second plant medicine ceremony where I was working with peyote. I don't know if
Mm.
you, yeah. So
Mm.
it's like a father medicine, very different to ayahuasca. And I really connected with my dad during that, and I realized um, how much unconscious resentment I had towards him because he wasn't around like I wanted him to be, because he said no to things, because he was always stern and strict, because, you know, um, name the story. Um, and then in that ceremony, I realized that he's a 60-year-old man who came to the UK at 9 years old from Africa, where they were living an amazing life, and had to come here basically at gunpoint with the opportunity to start a new life from scratch with nothing. So he went from living this amazing life to not poverty, but like on that line. So all he knew was hard work. And why did he want to work hard? To provide for the family. So all of that time he was sacrificing for me. And I never really even felt the true gratitude for that. I only saw myself through the victim lens. Is what it came down to, of like, oh, why I wish she was around more, etc.
And to be fair, as a kid, we don't have that awareness, the higher awareness of our parents are they're doing their best,
Yeah.
and they have their own traumas that they might not have healed. It's only when you grow up that you really realize the sacrifices they've made to provide for you.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's why it's so easy for as kids and teenagers to have that stuck energy and to accumulate trauma,
Yep.
right? What did peyote teach you about your dad or about your relationship with your dad that helped you unblock that trauma?
It helped me realize that he's a human being. He's not a superhero
Mm.
because I viewed him as my dad, right?
Mm.
Even that's a label. His name's Zul. Zulfikar is his name.
Cool name.
Yeah, it's a cool name, right? I realized that he was a person
Yeah.
and he was, like you said, doing the best that he could do. And that fundamentally changed my relationship with him because now I could view him in that way, not just as my dad, right?
Mm.
Which has a whole host of attachments and connotations and responsibilities around it. I could also view him as a person, right? And God, I felt just the amount of love that opened up in my own heart, which I could now encompass him in when I realized that was beautiful. And I didn't, and again, I was unconscious to this. I didn't know that was there. If you asked me before that, I'd say I've got a great relationship with my dad
Mm.
because on many levels we did, right? But the plant medicine showed me what was yet to be revealed, the peyote. And from that point, our relationship has just blossomed. Not because I told him about that experience. I think he wouldn't even have a clue. Even if I explained it to him in this depth, he wouldn't have a clue what that meant. But just from my side, the trauma being healed, it healed our relationship. And now we have these like beautiful, in depth, 4 hour long calls. I used to have so much resistance to his religion, following Islam. I'm spiritual, you're religious, we have different views. And now, just again, it's all the same. Like the essence is, yes, there are many parts that I don't agree with, but at its essence, from a higher perspective, it's all pointing towards the same thing. So yeah, it completely healed and transformed our relationship.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like peyote is a powerful medicine.
Yeah.
I haven't done it. I've done ayahuasca, I've done mushrooms, a couple other things. What was the lessons you learned from ayahuasca?
Oh man, how long we got? I would say the biggest one was around self worth, like we talked about. I think
Yeah.
that was the core. Um, I've had a few experiences with Aya. Um, I realized that as well. We can also have all of the intentions we want. We can have all of the goals we want,
Mm.
and ultimately, if the universe has another plan, that's what will happen.
Do you believe in destiny?
Someone asked me this a few days ago, actually, and my instant no, I'd never thought about it before. My instant response was like I don't know if I want to.
Resistance.
Yeah, it was resistance, right? It was is everything. I view it as like I think it's kind of predetermined in a way with
Mm.
destiny. Like it was destiny that I would meet this person, and I the honest answer is I don't know. What I would say is I do believe there are probabilities for things. So I do believe that there are parallel universes. I do believe that um, there are multiple timelines and everything happens simultaneously. And it is a decision in this current incarnation that determines whether we move on to this timeline or that timeline.
Mm.
So from a from a very high perspective, I guess I would say yes, I do believe in destiny because ultimately, like, we're playing out all of these different versions of this game, and it will move towards the same thing. However, in this specific 3D incarnation, I think that there are many ways it could go in terms of destiny. Right, it could be one of infinite opportunities, and it's the decision that we choose to make in this hologram in this game
Yeah.
that determines it.
I like that you said hologram. Do you think the true nature of reality is it a dream, a hologram, a simulation?
Mm.
Have you thought about this?
I've pontificated,
Pontificated.
meaning I don't have a, a solid stance on it yet. I think the beauty of choosing to pursue a spiritual path is that basically get to spend this whole life figuring it out, right? Which to me is the
Mm.
funnest thing. Like the games I used to play, like a game I used to be obsessed with was called RuneScape, which is basically this like this game with like unlimited levels where you could just continue playing it forever and never reach an end. I love that. For certain people, they would hate that. They need to know, like, once I get to level 100, it's completed and I put the game down. But for me, I just want to keep playing the game.
Yeah.
And it's that constant pursuit of that process and journey that keeps me excited.
Legend has it Ibrahim
Yeah.
is still playing RuneScape.
Level 135 out of 138, so I've still got some levels to go. I actually logged back into that game a few years ago, and God, I just couldn't play it anymore. I like really wanted to for the nostalgia.
You outgrow things.
Yeah, and I was just like, this video game is way more fun. This one we're playing right now is way better. You know,
Yeah,
it's
no,
just a
it's
different
so
game.
true. Like I used to love watching movies, but it's hard for me to watch movies now because this is the ultimate movie. These the characters around me, the storyline I'm going on, that matters to me much more now than watching something made up, on the screen.
Have you watched The Truman Show?
I love that movie. It's one of
Yeah,
my favorites.
yeah.
It's brilliant.
So Jim Carrey is one of my. There are very few people in the world that I quote unquote look up to. He is one of the very, very few. I always loved him as a child, just because I just felt like he just didn't give a fuck. He would just have this ridiculous humor, and it was just because he wanted to like give people some relief. He just wanted to like allow people to just like laugh, right? And he didn't mind making a fool out of himself. He didn't mind playing the jester. And now, he's well, he's let's say got to the highest points of success in Hollywood. He's seen, the things that are going on in the New World Order and all of these things, right? He's seen it firsthand, and he speaks out about it vocally at the risk of his own life. Realistically, like that's how serious it goes, right? People get deleted. It happens, right? It's an accident on the news, but it happens, and that's part of the reality we live in. Yet he still speaks out about it and does it with humor, and I think that's what gives him his edge, because he's doing it in a humorous way. People can still like, basically, you choose to read between the lines, right? You choose to see what he's actually saying, and that's why I asked you if you'd seen The Truman Show, because he's essentially doing that in that movie.
That movie is powerful.
Yeah.
It probably has some deep parallels to this reality.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah, it does, absolutely. Like sometimes I feel like I'm living in that. You know,
In what way?
in the sense that, so in this to give context for people, like in this movie, basically Jim Carrey is living on kind of like an island, but just imagine like a suburban kind of typical like American, white picket fence, has his job selling insurance, goes to work every day, sees the same kinds of people, has his loving wife who wants a child, and he's living in this reality that is completely orchestrated. He's actually living on a movie set where every single person around him is fucking pretending, right? He's part of this show, and everything is for sale in this world. Like everything's an advertisement. Everything is just being pulled by the puppet masters above, and he has no idea he's in it, right?
Until he starts realizing.
And it's just like The Matrix, right? So I love that movie as well, right? It's basically the same. It's just in a humorous way.
How do you feel? Define the Matrix in terms of this reality, and what is Matrix programming, and how do these programs run us?
So I would say a Matrix program, first of all, is just in a simple way, right? It's basically your mind, a false belief in your mind that keeps you enslaved within the 3D, right? So let's break that down. False belief, first of all, right? So belief, i.e., that may not be real, in your mind, which your mind is not you. Your mind is something separate that keeps you enslaved. What does that mean? Like trapped essentially in the 3D, right? So the Matrix, which is essentially everything around us, right? It's something you can't, like Morpheus says, you can't see, smell, or touch it, right? It's the media, it's the education system, it's the entire like world we live in, that is basically programming the whole society from birth to think and act a certain way, to go on a certain path that benefits the puppet masters, right? And Obviously there's the movie on it, which had still gets talked about to this day and is still highly relevant. Like, why that movie was made like 20 years ago? Like, why is that movie still relevant? Because it has a deep resonance within us, right? On some level, we realize that we're being harnessed for, we're being used for something else, and the degree of how sinister that goes depends on how much research you've done yourself. I do believe it's very sinister, and from my own research, and I would say, just to connect that with the 5D, part of my own journey was as I went on this spiritual journey, and it was love and it was light and it was so beautiful, right? I didn't want to acknowledge that,
Mm.
because why would I want to give attention to something so sinister? Because once you go down that rabbit hole and you start to then, if you suddenly like, things collapse real quick when you start to realize that, well, in that case, that means this is affecting like the highest people in government. It's affecting, the people you look up to, most people in like celebrity, education systems, media systems. You realize you basically just follow the money, and you realize that the whole world is orchestrated by literally a couple of people, which is crazy. And you can just follow it. You can do your own research, just follow the money always whenever you're doing your research. It's dark. Frankly, it's very, very dark. And so this is why I don't, even though I have very strong beliefs about this, I don't push this too hard, because I don't think a lot of people are ready to actually even acknowledge it. Like, I've had many conversations with people where I'm like, this thing, that thing, this was fake, this didn't happen, this is the real agenda here. Look at the last couple of years, climate change, all these things, right? But the thing is to believe that, then your whole freaking paradigm of the world has to get broken, right? And that's just too much for a lot of people to accept. And so I intentionally only started looking at that once I knew I could hold enough love and acceptance in my own heart, once I'd done enough healing myself to be at the point where I can hold this reality in love, and I can still have full love and acceptance for all of what's going on. Child sex trafficking, right? Um, Things going on with jabs, right? All of these different things. To be able to acknowledge that that exists requires such a high level of love for self and the world, to not go into a deep, dark hole of depression and apathy and think, well, what's the point? So I choose to educate myself. I choose to have this knowledge so I'm not ignorant, um, so I can acknowledge what's really going on, and at the same time, hold space for other people going through that. Equally, I don't talk too much about it, because I just don't think people are ready to even accept that. And also, everyone thinks you're a crazy conspiracy theorist, which is fun in itself, but that's a whole nother story.
How do you balance that perspective of, on the one hand, from the 5D perspective, everything is perfect, everything is love, everything is light. And then this other perspective of, well, actually, if you look deeper into some of this stuff, it's quite dark and um, quite scary.
That's I'm so glad you asked that, because there is no other hand, right? There's no like one side and the other, right? So the mind works on dualism, yet it's all the same. All of that darkness by default is, from a 5D perspective, is part of love, right? So there is no balance. From the highest perspective, there isn't. Now there's the human game, where you're like, how can this exist? That's a different thing to deal with. That's where it comes down to my perspective being able to accept what is, process, and then choose, okay, well, where do I go from here? And that's where that's a different human game. But from there is no dualism between these two things. From the highest perspective, it's all one.
One thing I've noticed in some of my friends is they get pulled into these rabbit holes and it becomes their whole life.
Yep.
which I think is unhealthy as well. In that they're constantly talking about all these scary things that are happening, um, but they lose sight of their own mission and they lose sight of the good in life, maybe. So have you seen that in your friends, or have you experienced that where there needs to be a healthy balance between knowing the truth but also not getting dragged into that energy, because
Yeah.
then you're of no help to anyone.
I think we all have a very unique life path, right? And I guess destiny can come into that as well. I don't think there's one right way to do it. I think for some people, going really deep down that rabbit hole is maybe their calling in this life, right? And to be that seemingly crazy obsessed person resonates with a certain number of souls in this reality, right? And so that's that. In one way, you could say they are fulfilling their dharma, right? They're fulfilling their message,
The
right?
issue is not that they're going deep into it, but that
Consumed by it, or
there's no like actions that they can really
right,
take to
right, right,
solve
right.
all these big scary
I get what you're
problems.
saying.
And so when I look at that, I'm like, yes, you know a lot and you're going on these forums and you're teaching all your friends about it, but you're not changing it and you have no power to change it, some of these things. So that dilemma of this thing is happening that's evil, yes, and like what can you do about it other than hold a sign somewhere, which doesn't really work. So
Held it for long enough, maybe some.
I have friends who hold signs
Oh,
like
really?
that, and I've never seen anything good or real change come out of it, other than their own ego gets a little bit stroked because, well, we went out and we held these signs.
So, okay, let's use that example, right? Because holding a sign, going out, maybe some kind of little protest, what, like whatever, right? From a higher perspective, to me, anything that is coming from resistance is just perpetuating the issue. Anytime there's a protest, right? The guys above are laughing because while people are, even if it's a quote unquote peaceful protest, you're still protesting, right? It's still resistance. When you're in resistance, things don't get solved, right? That's not when issues get fixed, and they know this. This is why every freaking war has been orchestrated. This is why when the scamdemic ended, and now there's a war in in Ukraine. It's weird how that just kind of ended, and then next day the war started, right? According to the media, it's really strange how that happened. Like, oh, that just went away. Now there's a war. Let's just focus on that. Oh, actually, no. Now let's focus on climate change. Can't call it global warming because, well, it's warming, so we need to call it change, right? Like, it's all orchestrated, and you can argue that with me until the clouds go home. I'm not going to argue. I'm just going to say you got to realize ultimately someone's making up a story, and you're choosing to listen to that story, right? So this is why I always say, like, don't listen to what I say, do your own research and then come to your own conclusion. So when you say about friends holding signs, you know, I've never been a sign holding kind of person. I've never even for things I agree with, I never protested once against this whole thing. There was a lot of it going on around me. I've walked through protests. But when I saw what was actually happening on the streets, when I saw women getting beaten, this is in the UK, getting beaten down by police officers with batons, I'm like, how is this solving anything? You know, like the people we support, quote unquote, trust are basically no different from the mafia in that scenario, right? They're just beating down women. That's not solving anything. So the only way to make change is to first take responsibility for yourself. And it's typically people who don't have their own house in order who want to give the most advice, who want to say the most, right? If you want advice from someone, go to someone who has none of their shit figured out and they'll talk to you all day long. But if you want to get advice from someone who has got their shit figured out, it's probably going to take you a few weeks to get a meeting with them, right? And there's a reason for that. So
The reason being that they're too busy
yeah,
living their own life.
yeah,
Yeah.
like anything valuable is hard to attain.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, but that's the truth. Right? It takes work. It takes, going on traveling around the world sometimes. It takes really putting yourself out there, like going deep
Mm-hmm.
and figuring this stuff out. It's not anything worth having isn't easy by default. Otherwise it's not valuable, right?
Yeah.
Like this ring isn't valuable. Okay, it's gold, but it's not. It's only valuable because it's hard to attain, and because we then decide to put value on that, right? If it was, if it was this glass, this is easy to attain, so it's not valuable, right? Or the perception we give it, at least. So it's the way I look at it is you can put your attention into different buckets, right? You can put it into what's wrong, you can put it into action, you can put it into yourself. You decide where you put your energy and attention, right? You only have a limited amount of it. So for me, in that example of the person holding the sign, it's into what's wrong. Okay. Well, then that's just perpetuating more of what is. That kind of energy, unfortunately, only attracts more of that, right? Whereas when you actually decide to, okay, acknowledge that and then take action in your own life, even just by healing yourself, you're making that's probably the biggest difference you can make at that point of time. Which, guess what? Like, by not doing that, you're just bypassing, right? Because you're not acknowledging your own shit. It's so much easier to focus on what's all of these atrocities happening than to just go within, right? Because that's painful, right? And just closing that loop on the trauma, the one thing I wanted to say on that is the reason for anybody who wants to like self-soothe and like self-heal, anytime that trauma is stored, it's stored with pain. And so for it to be released, it's going to be released with pain. So be prepared to actually experience that as it gets released. You will feel a very similar emotion to what happened when it got originally stored in your body.
Wow, that's really interesting. So, for any trauma to be released, you're gonna feel the pain of it.
On some level, yeah. This is why it gets trapped, right? Because think about it. Why would we choose to trap it in ourselves? Why would we choose to push it down? It's because we don't want to experience that emotion.
So, what we avoided experiencing then, we now need to go through it now
Yep.
properly for it to flow through us or get released.
Yep. This is why it's my whole thing is to release in real time, to use life as the opportunity, because otherwise you hold on to it for 50 years, you have a midlife crisis, right? Which is a thing. That's a normal thing that we just, oh, he's just going through his midlife crisis. That's ludicrous. That's just something that happens. It's because of all of this unprocessed shit, basically, right? And it does ruminate. It gathers interest, right? The longer you take to pay it, the more you're gonna have to pay when you do eventually decide to, or the universe is just gonna keep giving you signs. Maybe you start building up this resentment towards your boss, then suddenly now you lose your job, then suddenly now you start getting like physical issues, then now suddenly you have a heart attack. It's just going to keep getting more serious until you finally pay attention to it.
Do you still get moments now where old traumas float up in your consciousness?
So here's the thing with that, right? From my experience, this is the difference, right? There's a difference between the trauma and the memory of it. Okay. So I can think back to these moments we've talked about today, bring nothing up in me because they've been processed, right? So I can think about it and I can either be neutral or potentially above neutral and positive and like some positive energy, right? The only time something comes that these old traumas is if it hasn't been processed fully. So I'm just like, oh, cool. That's why I get to process today.
And so, when one of those things comes up, what is your way of processing it?
It's first of all realizing that this is coming up so it can be processed, right? And this is the key. Like, that sounds simple, but in the moment that can be difficult because I might want to avoid it and go into all those human tendencies, right? I might distract myself. I might drink out. Well, not that I do, but you might drink drugs. Wow, drink some drugs, kids.
What have you been doing last
Yeah,
night?
just be drinking drugs. I am drugs. Drink, avoid, right? These are all the common things we do. But instead, it's just allowing it to actually come and be felt. And that takes practice. But for me, that's what I personally do. I just work through it. I allow myself to fully feel it until it's gone. Um, and this is a useful thing that I've learned from my own journey that I really have thought about a lot, which is that as you go on this journey, right, you can seem to become. It looks like less emotional from the outside, and it can look like, oh, you're not, experiencing this joy in this moment, or you're not having these massive ups and downs, because we're only remembered for our lows and highs. At the end of it, you're not remembered for being like neutral and, living a content life. That's not what's glamorized in the 3D, right? So it can seem like, ah, you've become spiritual now and you're just like really calm. Like, do you not like love life? Are you apathetic? Whereas actually you're just completely content inside and neutral almost, right? That is a beautiful place to be. But it can be for some. I experienced this where I was like, oh, do I just like where are all these like ups and downs that I'm used to experiencing, right? Because it's essentially addiction, being addicted to those emotional ups and downs. This is why like people love drama, right? This is why people watch like the most popular things on Netflix are like rapists and like just traumatic things. There was like Squid Game, which that thing that blew up. I watched that thing for 5 minutes and I just felt my whole body like contracting. And I was like, why would I want to put myself through this? Right. I'm just feeling things I don't want to feel.
Yeah, I've
Right.
always wondered why people are into horror
Yeah.
movies. But I guess it must be because they get a thrill out of that up
Well,
and down feeling.
this is interesting, right? Because women statistically are more into horror and all of that stuff than men. And it's because women are just generalization, more act based more on emotion, right? So their heart chakra is well, the heart chakra is a feminine giving chakra. So for women, it is more typically more open, and so they're able to experience emotions easier typically than men. Again, generalization. And so the horror allows them to experience a wide range of emotions, and like this is this is why like again one of the common matrix things that I said like oh like crazy ex-girlfriend, right? That why is that a thing? If you think about it, it's because she liked to experience the emotional ups and downs, because it's the addiction to the, again, it's duality it's coming back to, right? Is the difference between the high and the low is what keeps her alive, or what keeps us alive, is that is that duality, which is why like in a relationship it's better to have like some kind of emotional like high or low, right? It's like you look at game and like you learn, you're a young man and you're learning how to like be with women. It's better to like have a positive or a negative emotion than just nothing, right? Why is that? It's because women prefer to like they act on that emotion, like that's the currency, right? It's that feeling state. So it's the ups and downs. So then when you go on the spiritual journey and things just become way more balanced, which is by the way like super healthy, it can seem like you're not experiencing life in the same way, which is you absolutely are. It's just you're able to be in a much more like healthy base state, right? So those fluctuations now just become smaller, which which is a very like beautiful part of the process. Just so I wanted to add that nuance in there for anyone who's at that point where they feel like, oh, I've processed a lot. Now I just kind of feel like pretty decent most of the time, but also, it's different, right? Because you're now in a different form. It's part of your ego has died, so it's a new version of self, which can sometimes be just like, maybe I should go back to that maybe I should go back to that emotional spike thing, because at least that's what everyone else seems to be doing. But no, absolutely. Like if that's what you're feeling, you're on
Have
the right
your
path.
have your friends called you out on on being not as spiky anymore,
Um, I
or
would say they've recognized. Like I'm very fortunate where I have like great friends, so they they would recognize it, but in like a positive way for
Yeah.
me personally. But definitely, I know people who have told me about this experience because I've experienced it personally, being like, I'm just kind of feeling neutral. So, which is why it's also important to acknowledge, again, all the emotions. Like, it's good to, like, I watch UFC, right? I'm obsessed with MMA. I grew up doing martial arts, done it for like 15 plus years. And a lot of people would always be surprised because it's so violent, it's so bloody, but it's a spiritual art. You know, it's to me, it's one of the purest forms of um, interaction we have. And all these guys, it's what they love doing, right? There's something about it. And I was watching a card on Sunday. It's like a massive UFC card, and my friend was like in like rooms away, and I was like shouting, screaming, like just enjoying it. And he was like, "Dude, what the hell's going on?" And I'm fully just present, enjoying experiencing all the emotions, right?
Mhm.
And so again, it's being able to like release attachment of like, what should a spiritual person look like? You know, should they just be this calm, mellow person all the time? Like, no, I think you should be able to experience whatever it is you want to experience.
What was the strangest or most woo woo thing that you've experienced?
Oh, there's actually certain things that I don't think I can talk about.
You did mention something about the pyramids when we
Yeah,
were. Is that one of the things you can't talk about?
kind of. Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, I could, but it just wouldn't be ecological, meaning it wouldn't be aligned to go into the details. But what I can say is like, have you ever been to the pyramids?
No, I'd love to.
Okay, so I would highly recommend it. I'd highly recommend it. So like one of my pursuits is to visit all of the like sacred sites in the world, right? The world has different chakra points, right? So just like we have our chakras inside of us, the world also has chakra points. Are you familiar?
It's like if the earth is a living being, it
Yeah,
has its own energy centers.
exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. So the pyramids are one of those energy centers. The throat chakra. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
This is the pyramids
oh, in Egypt.
in
Yeah,
Egypt, yeah,
should have been specific.
because there's
Yes.
probably other centers around the
Yes.
world. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So the pyramids of Giza,
Hmm.
where the Sphinx is, and yeah, those pyramids. And so I was basically just the way I can describe it is temple run, but in real life is the is the way best way I'll describe it. And I was with a certain group of people, and we were there to I can tell you to this day the reason I was there or how I got there, but I found myself on this pursuit going into these pyramids and you know bribing guards to let us into certain rooms to experience different energies and to
This
what's the
sounds
right
so
word?
fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
How come you can't talk more about it? Is it just because the other people involved?
Yeah,
I see.
essentially, and it was for a high mission that I still don't even know what it fully is. In honesty, is the it was for a much higher purpose that I currently am not even fully aware of what I was a part of.
But you know it's a higher purpose.
100%, yeah.
Hmm.
And sometimes, and I guess like the interesting thing to pull for this is sometimes you go on these pursuits and you get opportunities where logically you don't know why the hell you're doing it or what it is, but something towards you is pulling you, right? There's that internal excitement, there's that internal knowing.
You
And it,
feel it, yeah.
and this was just one of those moments where it made me just travel across the world and go and do it. And it was tough. It was dealing with all of these energies and these frequencies and so many triggers, so many provocations. Like we had like armed security, like agents coming up to us, being like, "What are you doing?" And following us around. Like it was no joke what we were doing. Um, but it was for a higher purpose. And sometimes I don't know. I still couldn't tell you what really happened, but I can just tell you that that will probably continually unfold for the rest of my life. And
Are the pyramids calling you back?
yeah, at some point, but not just the pyramids, like many other points of
Yeah.
life. right? And sometimes it's just allow it, just accepting that, yeah, this happened. I don't really know what happened, but I know something did, and just being okay with that, you
This
know.
sounds so mysterious. The
Yeah,
people
I
listening
know,
are going to be like,
I know,
give us
I
details.
know. I like it. Just I don't know. I talk about it in. I just shot a video which I sent to you, which we can link below, and I talk about a little bit about it in there because my thoughts are more fully formed.
Mm.
And what I've found is like the more I've gone on this journey, the more I actually do have a high degree of discernment around like the stuff with like the Matrix and all these things going on. Like, while it's great to have all of this knowledge and know all these things, and it's oftentimes the question is what's the intention for really sharing it? Is it just to like say, look at me, like I know these things, or to poke at someone else, or is it truly in service to others?
Mm.
And that takes a degree of discernment. And so I've found that actually the more I go on this journey, like the less it feels ecological to share. But that's just coming from my own truth.
What was the
Yeah.
deepest psychedelic trip that you've gone on?
Mm. Oh, that's a good question. Probably deep is a good is a if we're using that as the descriptive word, I would say probably ayahuasca. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably working with ayahuasca.
Because it connects you to your soul so deeply, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's the mother,
Mother
it's
Aya.
universe.
Mm-hmm.
It made me realize that this universe, this kingdom we're on is feminine, right? It made me have
Mm.
just this deep reverence for the feminine, and to really honor the feminine, not just in women but within myself.
Yeah.
um and I guess one of the things that taught me this was on that year I became a woman.
That's going
Which
to be the title of this episode.
yeah, you're gonna have to Photoshop me some interesting facial features. Um, what I learned was by being able to go to that extreme of living within the feminine, it taught me what it truly means to be masculine, because I have the reference experience, the duality, to look back and go, okay, wow, okay, so this is what it feels like to be residing in that feminine energy. And now I consciously choose to reside, for me, in the masculine energy, because that's what I personally feel good and operate best at. Maybe it's like 80-20,
Mhm.
in that kind of ratio. But then also it's opened me up to just much deeper relationships with women, because I can see the world through their eyes. It's allowed me to, like this whole like letting go and releasing, again, it's feminine quality, right? So it enables me to facilitate that in myself and others. So I think for any guy, it's funny because like masculinity is something so talked about at the moment, and I think the bits that's missing is honoring the feminine within, right?
Mm.
Being vulnerable, you know.
Tell me what
Yeah,
you learned about vulnerability.
it is strength. It's true strength. Vulnerability equals strength.
And how did you discover that?
I realized it because for the majority of my life, I couldn't even be honest, let alone vulnerable with myself about reality, let alone to anyone else. And that caused me immense suffering, to hold everything inside, because I was essentially living a lie, meaning I wasn't, nobody really knew what was going on internally within myself. And this is actually where most people live. Whenever I get on a call with someone, like the first call, they're like, oh, wow, like I've never even been able to tell anyone this before. And you can just sense the relief. Um, that's vulnerability, right? And it's like, if you have a child, if you have like a little baby boy or girl, and they're crying or something's wrong with them, your instinct is to go and support them and to help them, right? And this is what's missing in like modern society, is vulnerability, right? If you're in the middle of a negotiation And it's all in the logical mind. It's chess, it's strategy, right? Imagine if you could just remove that for a second and just be like, hey, here's how I actually feel about this. Here's why I'm actually doing this. It's based on this. Instantly, it appeals to somebody's heart, it appeals to somebody's emotion, right? And so it's actually like it's a strategic skill as much as anything to develop with vulnerability in conflict, right? Let's say you and I are disagreeing about something and you'll say your point and I'll go, no, you're wrong, it's this point. Well, as soon as I tune into vulnerability and go, hey, actually what you said here made me feel really bad and here's why, you know instantly that's going to be met and reciprocated because it's removing the resistance. And this is why I don't agree with like things like protest and all these resistance forms of trying to get change. It's because it only perpetuates more of that, and vulnerability is what breaks that cycle. And vulnerability is very aligned with acceptance, right? With being able to just be like, oh, okay, here's where I'm actually at. And so many people are living in delusion, particularly like this younger generation, like not that we're old, but like guys in like 18, 19, 20, 21. Like a lot of these guys are literally delusional. Like they are like, yeah, here's how I'm changing the world. Here's my plan to get to 10 million by the time I'm 30. I'm like, oh, and I find that inspiring in them because I'm like, because that's not how honestly, I'm more of a realist than anything. I'm an optimist, but I'm a realist at heart. That's just how I'm built. That's not a choice. That's how I'm built. I see these guys and I'm like, damn, that's inspiring. And then I'm like, what are you actually doing? And they're literally, and it's based on nothing. And that's that's also an issue because that is delusion. And so I try and like help them to go, okay, well, like where are you actually at now? And it's like, oh no, yeah, but here's where I'm gonna be. Yeah, but like, what's your current situation? Because until you accept your current situation, you can't actually change until you realize where you actually are right now. Because that is a denial of what is.
Yeah. In your own journey, what was the catalyst that got you from not being honest with yourself to becoming vulnerable and honest with yourself?
Immense pain.
Mm.
Immense pain. Just I tried it, right? I tried just lying to myself, just saying things were good. I'm living in this reality. I have this successful life. Um, and it was basically me living in a what's the best way to explain this? It's basically like, how you doing? Yeah, things are great. This is all going well, knowing that it's not internally, right? So the more times I did that, the more just like internally it just chipped away at my soul a little bit each time.
Mm.
And I did that enough to the point where it just all came toppling down. Like that moment with the clients leaving was a beautiful point because it was like this stark realization of like what is, like this is a painful point to be at.
Mhm.
Typically it was low points. Like I was having a conversation at dinner yesterday about I have a cat called Fred at home in London, and originally adopted him with like he had a broken leg. And the story is funny of how we came to be because I feel I have a spiritual connection with this cat. Like anyone knows how much I love him. I was probably 17 at the time. I was just basically I was in Spain. I got a perforated eardrum. Somebody punched me in the ear underwater, and like my eardrum perforated. I then had to get on a plane going back to the UK. Flying on a plane with a perforated eardrum was probably the most painful experience I've ever had in my entire life. I then got back, got my results for college, which were all D's, which meant I couldn't get into the university I wanted to go to. I then, because of the perforated eardrum, couldn't go to this big festival with all my friends that we'd planned all year. So I just get home and I'm like, I just want to crawl into bed and just cry. And I get back and my bed's broken while I'm away because my room was being painted and the bed got broken by accident. So there I am laying on a mattress in my living room. Um, and this little cat with a broken leg comes and sleeps with me. And through this process of me being at my lowest point, him being at his lowest point, and helping him like rebuild, teaching him how to walk again, and me just like building myself back up, it was a realization of like, oh wow, okay, like all the worst things that could happen in life at that moment in time happened, and just being awakened to that reality, right? And there's a lot of vulnerability in that. What makes the process so much easier is just allowing yourself to be vulnerable. But there's a difference between vulnerability and victimhood. Because in that story, I'm not in any way trying to be like, oh, you should feel sorry for this. There's zero of that. Because the moment I view myself as a victim, I'm just perpetuating that reality. And this is for people who are like very heart centered, it can be I was like this for so long. I would easily just fall into people's stories because they see themselves as a victim, but it's so disempowering at the same time to do that. So there's being able to observe with love, but also no attachment to their situation. That's how to truly help someone. And so when I look back at that version of self, I'm like, cool, yeah, that's those are the physical things that happened, and that made you the person you are today, so that you can go and fulfill X, Y, and Z. Um, so it's always a perspective, right?
I'm glad you brought up victimhood because it's something that a lot of people fall into, the victim mentality.
Yeah.
What would you tell someone who may be stuck in that mentality and they want to break that victim mindset and shift into a more healthy mindset?
It's hard to speak to a victim sometimes. um,
Have you gone through that journey ever
yeah,
where
yeah.
you felt like a victim and then
Oh yeah,
you turned
mass
things around for
massively.
yourself?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Low, like, or viewing myself as like a martyr. Like, oh, everything's so
Yeah.
hard for me. The world's against me.
Was there things that helped you then to shift that perspective?
Yeah, I would say for me, it just comes down to self responsibility, right?
Mm.
It's it's a lot. It was a logical decision for me. It was, does being in this uh this mentality serve me and other people, yes or no, is what it came down to. And there are many ways you can deliver that, right? I would say, if depending on who it is, I would, probably come in a little bit more of the feminine and be a bit softer to say that and help people come to that realization. But the bottom line is that, like, is this serving you, yes or no? And if the answer, if you can admit the answer is no, cool, then
Mm.
just leave it behind you. And then now you're empowered, because when you're a victim, you are, by default, something is being done to you, right? So there is some kind of like injustice happening in the world to you. It's happening to you, right? Meaning you're not in control. And if you want to be in, every entrepreneur wants to control things, right?
For
um,
sure.
and so based on that paradigm, if you want to control things, then you don't want to be a victim, right? So it starts with that. Does this serve you or not? If no, then great. Now you have your power back, because now you can take responsibility for where you are, accept where you are, and now choose to do something differently.
Talk to me about your journey with self love and how that changed you.
Mm. Yeah. It was probably happened similarly to self-worth for me.
They seem very much linked together.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very similar. I would say with self-love. So I always had resistance to self-love. Because it just, again, felt like giving yourself, like when I would see people post like, oh, just eating like this ice cream, self-love, or, doing this, having this bath with rose petals, self-love. I was just always like, okay, well, in that paradigm, sure, but like doesn't really resonate with me. To me, the way in which I look at love is like, those are like nice little Disneyfied parts of love. Um, but it's really just doing the things that I know are like good for myself, right? It's self love to me is actually not eating that ice cream. It's actually like, no, choosing to have like, healthy, nutritious food that I know serves me, right? Self love is, from a masculine perspective, at least that's the only way I can view reality. It's actually just doing things that are in alignment with love. And to me, like everything that's in alignment with love is aligned with my mission. It's aligned with the 5D. And it's basically just being embodied from that place. And at the same time, going through it's like so many entrepreneurs I speak to actually don't like themselves. And I was definitely like this. They actually don't like what they do. They don't feel like they're adding value to the world. They're very hard on themselves. And all of these things are, the opposite to self-love, you know? And why? It's because that's been conditioned to the route for success. So again, it's one of these, it's like self-worth, where it's like, well, on one side you can see of course, from the high perspective, you can see what the value is in self-love, but then from some perspective in the middle, it's like, well, if you just love yourself, then like, do you still have that motivation and that drive and all of that? And that's what gave the resistance to me. But then as I integrated that, it's like, no, like I fucking love myself and I'm still in pursuit of everything, right? But that took work to get to that point, because when I felt love for myself truly, when I could just be just content in who I am, essentially, and just feel good about myself for no reason, then suddenly like the motivation changes, because now building the business or doing X pursuit isn't to try and make myself believe that I'm worthy of love, because now I love myself, right? So then now it's like, okay, the goal gets to get realigned to a higher purpose. And that's where the resistance was for me from going into that whole journey of self-love. It was thinking that it will detach me from my goals. Because if I love myself and I'm not hard on myself, then I won't want to go towards those goals. So there were like steps to that journey from now, where I can just act from a place of pure self-love and be super motivated at the same time. And that's a great place to be. And I'm like really grateful to be able to spend most of my time in that space now. But it took some work, and it took going through heartbreak to also understand what you can call unconditional love is versus attached to love. For me, I always like to learn from like real life experiences. Like I'm not like read a book and recite the book and pretend that this was all my idea kind of guy at all. Like I vehemently hate that. There's nothing worse than a coach who hasn't been through any life experience.
Yeah.
So I like to. Oh look, I learn from people who are way smarter than me to cut the learning curve, right?
What did heartbreak teach you?
Ooh, have you been through heartbreak?
Oh yeah.
Okay, heartbreak. Okay, many things. It taught me that what I had been experiencing in terms of love was just attachment syndrome, right? Because you always hear, okay, so you always hear the example of two halves coming together to making a whole, right? And this is actually what's perpetuated by the media and the Matrix, by the way. It's like, you complete me. And that's seen as like, that's written on every Valentine's Day card, right? You complete me. Well, then you're saying that what that's actually saying, and what I'm hearing is that you've got a load of trauma and shit that you haven't yet resolved. And this person's just coming together with their shit and their trauma, and you're coming together and you're like clinging on to this like very low version of love. And I'm like, well, good luck with that. That's why most marriages end in divorce. And so I experienced this I'd say I had like two major like multi-year relationships, and basically what it taught me is that I was just playing out the relationship with like my mum with these in these relationships, in terms of like the attachment styles that we had towards one another. The reason why heartbreak is so hard, and I would actually argue that men struggle with heartbreak more than women. The reason I'm gonna say that is because, and I've just seen this happen so many times where women, because women are typical, again it's generalization, but women are more heart centered just from a energy center point of view, and women will typically give more into the relationship in terms of like their, the love, the nurturing, the care. All of these things are intangible. And so what happens so often is that as a man, and this is what I definitely happened to me, is like I didn't realize the value in all of those feminine qualities, because I'm bringing, maybe I'm paying for the apartment, or I'm like sorting out the holidays, or I'm like providing tangibly in the 3D. And so I didn't put the weight and the value on those feminine qualities. And this is why so many men experience heartbreak, is because they don't value those those qualities in the feminine, just because they don't have the awareness of the value of what the feminine brings, right? And so what does that mean? If you don't value something, then you don't appreciate something, you're not grateful for it. And that's why it's always the story of, the breakup happens, then the woman, goes and lives her best life typically, and then the man goes and does the same thing, but then he realizes what he missed and gave up, and then wants to get the woman back, right?
Uh-huh.
That happens all the time.
That's where the attachment comes in as well.
And that's where the attachment comes in. Okay, here's the thing. Here's the next level to that. The love that you felt together with the woman was not from her. It was you being open enough to feel that love that is already inside of you. The love was there the whole time. It was just that that other person came in as a mirror and revealed that love, and your heart just opened more so you could feel more love.
Mm.
That's all that happened. Okay, nothing to do with them. They just happen to be the one to allow it to open. But then what happens is when you break up, you close.
Mm. And
So
now it's more painful.
now it's more painful. And so you talk about self love. Well, self love is being able to stay open and being able to be in love with yourself. And so now the difference is when I'm in that situation, and again, like people reflect that to me, they just seem like, you just don't seem, like bothered if this person comes or goes. And it's like, no, I'm bothered. It's just that I'm good either way. And if they want to stay, that's beautiful. And if they don't want to stay, that's also beautiful. Like it's literally like neutral in between those two things happening. And that's, yeah, that's self-love.
So there's a link between self love and love that you see very clearly,
100%.
in that they're almost the same, as in the other person that you're in love with is actually tuning you deeper into your own self love.
They're just they're just a mechanism to help you be more open. You have the complete capacity in your own life to open yourself up, to open your heart up and experience that love all by yourself. They just happen to be, to have the soul contract with you to come along and open that, just like you did with them,
Mm.
probably.
Interesting.
I wanted to ask you what your experience with heartbreak has been.
Mm. Well, I recently had a relationship where there was a lot of lying going on that I wasn't aware of until months later. And so that betrayal, where you've invested in someone and you realize that um, certain parts of them are not true, certain stories they've told you are not true, that's really heartbreaking. And the crazy part is that I still loved them even after finding out all of it, after knowing for sure that this relationship was toxic and unhealthy for me, and breaking up and then getting back together because part of my body was still craving them, part of my mind was still into them, you know? That surprised me. Because you think once you know that someone is not a fit for you, and not only that, but also that there's not any trust in the relationship anymore, you'd think that would be enough to tell the heart to stop loving them. But actually, that wasn't true. And even to this day, I still feel a lot of love for them, despite the betrayals, despite the pain, the heartbreak. So that's been my experience.
I'm doing this thing. I call this a new thing I started doing. It's called resonance check. It's like looking at the time and just seeing like how many goosebumps do I have on my helm? A
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
Um, Deeply relate to that. And what I would say is that love is not dependent on actions, right? You can still have love for someone. And actually, I would say that's an even higher perspective to take, to still have love for someone, despite what those actions were. Now, the thing to tune into is that love, is there attachment in that love? Or is it a pure form of love where it's just love as you would love anybody because you have love for everybody?
Hmm.
Um,
I think it's both.
yeah.
I have a pure love for them that is almost a spiritual love. Like I know that at a deeper level, they're just human. They're trying their best, and of course, even the line that was in the relationship is just them, their own defense mechanisms or their own patterns coming into play. But then there was also attachment, probably, where you feel so good with them that you tend to overlook all the problems until they bite you in the ass. And then you break up, you're like, never again. And then a few weeks later, circumstances arise, and you get back together.
Yeah.
Like I broke up and got back together with this person 4 times. It took me 4 times before I was able to go enough. Like it was getting too much, too much
Yeah.
repetitive.
Yeah.
But you'd think it'd only take once or twice, right? This was the first time in my life where it like I had like 4 times breaking up. That's crazy to me.
And what do you think it was that brought you back together those four times?
Just the connection was so good on so many levels, other than the levels that were not working, that I think it kept pulling me back. And maybe the naive belief that, well, this time it'll be different because now I'm aware of this pattern so I can mitigate it. But that wasn't the case.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's connection, right? Is was
It's,
the answer.
yeah, the connection is so strong, but there was a toxic element to the relationship that I knew was not healthy. So when you know something's toxic and yet the connection is so good, I think that was really confusing my brain. I
Mm.
couldn't crack that egg. It's like, how can it be so good, yet I know it's not good for me long term? Like I knew, like I was zooming out 5 years and asking myself, would I want to be with this person in 5 years, or how would my life flow if I was with them? And I knew that there was no future there. There was no happy ending. So objectively, logically, it made complete sense to end it as amicably as possible and just move on. But the heart wants what it wants, you know?
Well, it's a human need, isn't it? Connection. It's one of
Yeah.
our human needs.
Yeah. It was the most confounding, frustrating, beautiful experience, painful, pain and beauty at the same time.
And what's your like? How do you feel about that now? From however long past that, being in
Well,
this.
now it's like you said about trauma is like when you feel neutral about something, then you know you've pretty much gotten over it. So now there is a neutrality. And in fact, they texted me the other day, and I was something that would maybe make me text them back right away. But now I just archived it, because I know I can see the broader perspective. I can see that that road does not lead to where I think it leads to. So I think neutrality is what what it comes down to.
You were asking about self-love earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That is self-love
Exactly.
right there.
Yeah.
That's a very practical example of self-love, because you realize that that is not good for you, and you can still hold love for them, but you're
Yeah.
you're doing what you need.
Boundaries,
Yeah.
you know? I think that's
Yeah.
what it taught me the most is boundaries. And yeah, like you said, like I still love them. Like I'm not archiving their message out of spite or out of some sort of resentment. Although there might be a little bit of that there still. It's truly just because I know that for my own peace of mind, I need to move forward with life, you know? Yeah. But love is interesting because even now you're making me think of the previous relationships I've been in, which were not anywhere near as toxic as this one. And even there, like, when you get hurt in a relationship, it kind of stays with you and then it floats up sometimes and you have to resolve it. And you're like, really, this thing that I thought I healed is still there on some level? Like, have you ever experienced something like that?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. There's differences to it, right? So it can come up again, and you may need to heal something, right? Because you may still feel that emotional charge to
Hmm.
whatever the event was. And that's, yeah, okay, cool. There's still things to heal. But then equally, there's just like, do you know who Peter Crone is?
Sounds familiar.
He's known as like the mind architect. He's just an incredibly good coach. Like, I've been personally coached by him this year in his mastermind. I think you would love his content. And somebody in this mastermind we were in said, I've got this ex, and I thought, and you could tell the guy's clearly like just in a dark place. He's clearly not over her, like loves her, beautiful soul, but just clearly like still attached to her very much so. And he's like, look, I know we're not going to get back together. In fact, she's moved on. She's, you know, going to get married to another guy. Yeah, I think about her every single day. Right.
Mm.
Yeah. And I was like, good question, man. Don't know who else that relates to. And it was so beautiful because this guy was in so much pain, right? Of just like the constantly thinking about her, and she was just, she's still with me, is what he said. And Peter, the coach, just had the most beautiful response, which is like, how lucky you are.
Hmm.
The guy's like, what do you mean? I can't get rid of her. And it's like, well, isn't this a woman you loved? Yeah. And you still have that love for her, but in a more like healed way, it's not going to go anywhere. Yeah. Well, how beautiful that you get to still experience that love.
But
And
isn't it distracting also to him because he's thinking about her being with other guys and
well, it's only distracting if there's still attachment.
Mhm.
So I can, like, if a memory of an ex comes into my awareness, right, or I'm going back in photos and I see a photo triggers something, right? It's only distracting if I still have attachment to that. Because if I just see it as, that was a beautiful memory. We were in like Lake Como and we were paddleboarding with a big bunch of friends. Like, I can experience love for all of that, and I can
Mm.
give myself that, yet not be thinking, I wish I had that back.
Do you think this guy was still attached?
There was some attachment there, but he also knew that, like, he wanted to move on. Like, he wanted what's best for her. Clearly, just a beautiful soul, but she just kept coming up, right? She just kept coming up. And what Peter said was, and it made me feel a lot better about myself, because this guy's like very, very far on his own journey. Is that, like, he thinks about his exes come up all the time. He's had many, many partnerships, and they still come up, and that's beautiful.
Mm.
Like, how beautiful that you still get to have that memory.
That is a fantastic reframe
Yeah.
of something that you could think of as a problem, but instead you think of it as, wow, I'm so lucky.
You got to experience that love.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think of that about my situation too. Of like, despite the pain, it's like there was some incredibly beautiful moments, and what a privilege to experience love with another human being.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is you have this like quiet, not quiet, but you have this charisma around you, but it's not a flashy charisma. It's like a quiet charisma. And I wonder if that comes naturally to you or if that's something that you worked on.
Well, thank you for the compliment, first of all, I think.
It's like that energy, right? It's like when I first met you, there was this spiritual energy I felt. There was this, oh, he's tuned into source type of energy, but then also this charisma. And it's a beautiful quality.
Well, first of all, like, what is charisma, right? Because I think a lot of people look at charisma as, the person's characteristics and all of these things. But to me, charisma is how I make you feel about yourself and how you feel in my presence. To me, like, that's true charisma. And so I would say it's definitely a natural part of me. It's maybe something that has grounded more over time as I've gone on my own journey. And I just, what it is, I think I'm just comfortable in who I am. I'm just comfortable in my skin. Like, there's, me, previous me, if you said, ah, all of that, but I don't really like your shoes. I would have just been like shattered the fact that you don't like my shoes. I would have been like, oh well, I need to go and get some new shoes now.
The younger you.
Yeah, the younger me.
Uh-huh.
I would have been very fragile by, somebody saying something. I wouldn't have admitted that to myself or anybody else, but deep down I was deeply cared about what other people thought. Um, and so now I'm just really comfortable in who I am. And the reason why I think one of the ways I got to this point is just knowing what my intentions are truly. Like, one of my best friends said to me, like, one time, "You are my moral compass." And I was
Mm.
like, "Oh, that's a really interesting thing to say. What do you mean by that?" And he just said, "I just know where your heart is and who you are as a person. And I just always know that, you know, you keep me on track because of the way you are with your life, because I know, like, what your character is and who you are as a person." And he actually put me into his will, where if he passes away, um, I'll get a certain amount of money, because he knows I'll use that to go and build schools in Africa. And, like, bearing in mind, he has a family, he has a girlfriend, etc. So I think for me, I know what my intentions are, and I know where I'm coming from. So whenever I have something that combats that, it's okay, because I know where I'm coming from, and that doesn't have to align with everyone.
What is your primary intention throughout the day, throughout the week? Is there like a running
A
theme?
lot of the time, it's anchored in service. A lot of the time, so
Mm.
it's to support my mission of, like, raising the collective consciousness, helping humanity just, like, unplug from this matrix. Um, so if I'm doing that, then I just everything else kind of just comes into play. Like, it's like the universe gives me all of this resource to go and fulfill that mission, the more I'm in alignment with that mission. And that's the intention, right? The intention is just to be in love. And I think one of the reasons what makes me a good coach is that I can hold love. I can really hold space for people. And so something I get reflected all the time is, like, I just feel like I can just tell you anything and just be myself around you, because I truly don't cast any judgment.
I noticed that.
But that was not always the way. I used to judge myself so much, right? Which meant I would judge other people unconsciously because I was judging myself. And so part of that self love journey was to be able to release that self judgment, right? And this was the most beautiful process because I always wanted to be someone who could be in service to other people, to be able to help other people, to be, when people come to me, I remember there were times when like friends or family would come to me with, some problem, and I just couldn't help them. I just didn't have the capability to help them. I just flat out did not know what to say. I didn't know how to handle it. They were dealing with some emotion. I didn't know what to do. Right. And that was so painful because all I wanted to do was be able to just give them that support in that moment. And so this was one of the things that really like pivoted me into service. It was for wanting that. And there was some distortions in that, that wasn't completely pure because part of it was this wounded healer archetype, right? Wanting to be the one who can help others, but deep down, like needed the help themselves. And so that was part of the journey as well for me. Was recognizing that was playing out. Again, part of being in service is being committed to yourself first before being in service to others, because otherwise, you can want and have all the best intentions, but if you're not healed, then you can't really help others fully or to the best of your ability at least. So I think the reason why that is just because I've done the work myself. And there's just no shortcut for that. You either have or you haven't, and you can tell. Um, and so, yeah, I'm just at a point where like I'm just very content. Like I'm like it takes a lot to waver me, um, because I just know that whatever happens, like I'll be okay because I can go to that worst case scenario. I can fear set that thing happening, play that out, and still be fine. And I think there's a lot of power in that. I think it's easy to want to avoid, well, what if, let's just say, like you take 5 wrong turns, right? And you end up in a bad spot. Well, can you still be okay there?
Mm.
And if the answer is yes, then damn, you're unshakable.
I think it comes down to, like you brought it up, knowing yourself deeply. And when you know yourself, you're less easily shaken because you know your core, you know your deepest part of yourself. Is there any advice that you can offer to people who want to know themselves deeper so they are more centered and grounded?
Mm. Yeah, I guess it comes to self awareness as well, right? It's kind of one of these like skills, intangible skills that is talked about a lot that we all know is valuable, but it's like, how do you actually get to that point? And for me, it's actually not doing anything. It's the act of not doing. It's actually the act of removing all of the things that are distracting you from knowing yourself. For example, the media, social media, unhealthy food, drinking, going out. All of these things can be beautiful in moderation, by the way, but these are typical distractions. So it starts with removing all of the inputs that are stopping you from knowing yourself, because your default state is actually to just be present. And when
Mhm.
you're present, that's when you can start to like learn who you really are. So like a practical thing I did earlier this year was to do like a silent retreat. Not some thing, spending 10 grand to go out into the jungle with loads of people. I just took myself out on a random day and took myself out into the countryside in England and just spent a day in complete silence, no phones, no talking, basically no food, just to be.
It's funny, my previous guest did the same thing. He went to a cabin for 4 days and
Wow.
just turned off all the phones, just brought some books with him. And
Well, he did. I only did a day, so he took it. He did it to another level. But the reason why I like this is because one, you don't need anything to do this. You can just sit in your room.
Mhm.
Yeah, anyone can do this. Um,
What did it teach you?
it taught me how much distraction I still have in my life. I remember waking up and I remember going and I was in a period of intense in like an intense work period at this time, so I was a little bit tired. And I remember being like, oh, I'm just going to use this as an opportunity to sleep in, right? And that will cut half of my day. So I can like cheat this system. So I was already trying to like find games and
Gamify it.
gamify it. Woke up 5 a.m. naturally. And then remember being like, oh, God, okay, here we go. All right, let's just surrender to it. And, I just spent a little bit extra longer, doing some meditation, doing some cold shower, just some practices. And my mind was on overdrive. It was just incessantly thought. And I was like, why are all these thoughts coming up? This is strange. I don't usually have this. It was just trying to distract me. This was the like last layer of resistance, because now there were no physical things. I couldn't work because work can be a distraction and often is. All these things can be distractions. So thought was the last line of resistance. That was the only thing that could occupy me. And I remember I was on the beach, and these beautiful white cliffs. They're called Seven Sisters Cliffs in the UK. Just stunning. Like you can walk right up to the cliff edge, and it's just these white rocks really high up over the sea. And I remember getting to this point where I was just sitting. This was after doing some ball tanning, just FYI, necessary detail. Um, and I was just sitting there looking out at the sea, and it was just complete presence, just no mind. Like my peripheral vision was, I still don't know how, but it was expanded, and I was just there. And it was just absolute unlimited bliss. Just more and more and more, just ecstasy. Consistent. It was one of the highest states I've ever felt in my life. Probably this was after maybe 10 hours of being in the silence. And it was just boundless. It would just never end and just continue to come. Whatever I did, it would just keep coming. And it was just like, whoa.
How do you explain that? Is that you connecting to God, connecting to some point zero, like some sort of base level of consciousness that is just bliss and love?
I would just say this is actually our natural state.
Yeah.
I actually feel this is our natural state, and all these other things are just blocking that from being. And I think it's possible to actually experience that all of the time. Now, is that what you actually want? Is that a likely reality? Probably not. But I genuinely believe that is possible to experience that. And the reason why I have that strong belief is because I never want to create an excuse for not being in that state. If I'm not in that state, it's because of me. And there's no judgment around that. There's nothing negative. It's just matter of fact, right? Because I know I can get myself to that state by doing nothing. So it literally requires nothing so I've now had that reference experience, right? Coming back to the embodiment, and I've had that many times now. But I now have the reference experience to know the best state I've felt, and I've done like ecstasy and all different kinds of things, right? So I've been in like those kind of states, has been from me literally doing nothing. So now I know just wholeheartedly that in order to experience these amazing states, it does not require me to do. I can have them at any single time, which is why I'm so detached, because I don't need anything to feel good, because I know if it comes down to it, absolute worst case scenario, I'm sitting in a prison cell with nothing and nobody, I can go and access that state, and I can go and feel complete bliss. So that's it. Yeah, that's it.
And yet there is a masculine part of us that wants to do, that wants to
Of
build.
course. Yeah, and that's why I'm not in that state a lot of the time,
Mm.
because equally, whilst holding that, I do believe life is suffering to some degree.
You
Like,
believe life is suffering
yeah,
to some degree.
yeah, like the Buddha said, right? Buddha's
Uh-huh.
first noble truth is life is suffering, and I do believe that this is the human part as well.
But
That
then on the one hand, life is bliss.
Yeah,
And on the other hand, life is suffering.
yep.
Hmm.
And this is why all of these spiritual, at least from my perspective, these spiritual truths are all um like juxtaposition, right? They're like these seeming opposites that are actually the same. This is why Um, this is why this stuff takes, like, it's not black and white, right? There are these truths that have to be figured out oftentimes by going to these extremes to then come back to the middle, that it's actually one and the same, comes back to oneness. Because why is suffering not bliss, right? That's only a perception created by the mind.
Mm.
Think about it, right? Do you go to the gym, or do you like work out or anything? You know, sometimes when you're putting yourself through the ringer and that pain, you feel really damn good about yourself, right?
Hmm. Especially afterwards.
That's putting yourself through suffering and
Mm.
feeling bliss.
That's a good point. Yeah. You once said that all we are is a collection of walking stories.
Mm.
Why do we get so attached to our stories? And what do you recommend to not get attached to them?
Yeah, I mean they're pretty convincing, aren't they?
Mm.
Those stories. Why do I think we're attached to them? I think our minds, just the way they're wired, is to recall things based on story, right? We remember stories. Like, I don't know the scientific basis for this, but if I imagine when we were in tribes around fires, it was the story of what happened today. I went to fight this saber-toothed tiger and it bit my arm off, but I managed to like slay it, and now here it is back, and it's recalling what happened, right? It's the
Yeah.
way in which our minds recall things, right? And I think that's why do we think like that? It's because in the story there is emotion, and we're emotional beings, and so it appeals to the heart, not just the logical mind of like the textbook XYZ. So I think that's why we recall stories. It's because they encapsulate emotion, right? It's why people are like love the classic Hollywood film arc, right?
Mm.
Where there's the up and there's the down and then there's the happy ending. It's because to go on that journey, there is a um, like plethora of different emotions that are felt, and we just want to feel. I think really one of the things we want more than anything is just to experience emotion. And I would basically, that's why I think we do everything we do. It's to experience an emotion at the end of it, right? So with the stories, it's just the way, it's our way of experiencing that emotion.
But the I think there's a deeper idea here that when you say we are a collection of walking stories,
Yeah.
then who are we really underneath those stories? Who are we at the deepest part of ourselves?
Yeah. I love that question. Um, I I don't want to give away my answer to that because I think it's something that everyone, I don't want to unwrap everyone's present for them.
I love that.
And also, who am I to think I'm right?
Mm.
With my answer, like my answer is truth to me. But what I will say is actually this is one of the first things I talk about in the mastermind as well. Is who are you? We do like 3 hours on just answering that question. But I think it's something that we should all get to question and ask, right? Because if we're not our thoughts, we're not our emotions, we're not our stories, then yeah, it's a really good question. Who are we? Um, in terms of the walking stories, what I mean by that is we experience all of these different events, and those events become a record in our brain. So our minds are a record of the past, of all of these different stories. And we tend to just base our future actions off of those stories. So it's like, okay, you experienced heartbreak, the person lied to you. Now in the future, if you're continuing to walk with that story, you're not going to be scanning. As soon as you meet a potential suitor, is this person trustworthy? Is this person not trustworthy? Like loads of women will say, if
I've
you,
noticed it affected me in
yeah,
that way.
and that's natural, by the way, right? That's a natural mechanism that we have inbuilt into us for survival to stay safe.
I wish it hadn't though, right? Because I
Yeah,
want to be back to my past self where I just would trust someone, but it feels like this person's behavior affected now my trust towards future people, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, and that is, there is a degree of like that's natural,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
Because it happened, and
mhm,
you're a human. If I was to go, all men are fill in the blank, how many women would say liars? How many
Mm.
women would say cheats? How many women would say, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So this is all of the programming based on either the individual story or the mass matrix story, which programs us to believe certain things and stories that are beneficial to them to control us. So the question is, where did that story come from? Is that story even true? Does that story serve you? And then then now it's a conscious choice. Do you want to hold on to that story? And so if you don't want to hold on to that story, it then comes back to, okay, well, can you release that? Yes, that event did happen, and acknowledge it and let it go. Because as long as there's some of that there, you are blocking yourself from experiencing like that deep layer of trust, right?
Mhm.
And also, like, again, there's no right or wrong as to when this happens. I do believe things happen in divine timing. Like I'll give you my own example. One of my first relationships, I felt there was like a layer of distrust at the end of it as well. I was so heartbroken, and basically I just closed after that and said, well, I will not experience that again. And so for 6 years after that, the amount of relationships that I closed off with amazing people because I was closed was, it was a lot, right? And I, in that process, caused a lot of pain to others because I just couldn't open. Even though there was something great here, I just couldn't open because I was still living in that past story. So I was a walking story, right? Because I was just reliving that again and again and again. And then once I opened myself, I opened my heart. Like I was doing a lot of meditation at the time to just like open myself to be able to feel love. And it felt like this tiny little like seed.
Mm.
Something was there. I could barely connect with it, but luckily I had my mum cheering me on, being like, no, trust me, this is the right thing. And I'm like, all right, here we go. And then once I could start to feel that love just from being from myself again, instantly attracted somebody into my life, where I felt more love than I'd ever felt up until that point.
And it came from self love.
Came from self love. And here's the thing, there was still many distortions in that love. There were still traumas that I didn't know, but there were, right? But I don't look back at that going, like, what a mistake. No, because also I believe that we come together in order to like heal one another. And I also don't believe that a relationship has to be forever. I don't think that's how the value of it is determined. We can have a relationship for 2 weeks or 2 decades. It has nothing to do with the amount of depth and connection and love that we experience in that time. I've experienced crazy levels of depth instantaneously that most people would think is crazy or wouldn't be able to comprehend. And I've also had 10-year relationships or people I know where there's very little, because you can only go as deep as you have gone,
Mhm.
right? You can, or the other person if it's in another relationship. So the deeper you can go in yourself, the deeper you can then go in a relationship. And so to attract that relationship, it's just a reflection, right? You're just going to attract who you are, who your counterpart is, energetically, mentally, spiritually, visually, what they look like. All these things is it's just a reflection.
Yeah. These days, how is your love life?
My love life is great. I'm in love with myself
Mm.
primarily.
That's your primary relationship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
primary relationship. Yeah, it's in a beautiful spot right now. I'm when I if I I meet somebody who is resonant with me, um, it's a beautiful experience because now looking at it through this lens, through all these things I've talked about, it's like I can experience that like giddy look, I'm experiencing some of this at the moment, right? So I have to use myself as an example. Like I could experience this like giddy, childlike love and deep connection at the same time, and then mission drivenness and all of these things, which are so beautiful and equally not need any of it. And this is probably like it's beautiful to see all of this work, inner work, paying off, because now I can look at it through this lens and actually experience it in that way and see like, oh, this is incredible. And I also don't need it. You know, it's a choice. It's a conscious choice to um, to come together in a union, like in a divine union.
Mm.
It's it's not based on, oh, my parents said I should. I feel that's more with girls anyway, but you know, get married by this certain time or this certain person. It's none of that. It's just purely based um, on choice, which is really cool.
Mm.
Really, really cool.
I love that. I wanted to ask you about your mastermind, Quantum Mind.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that, and for those curious, why it might be a good fit for them.
Yeah. So the Quantum Mind was born out of a lot of pain. When I got to that moment on that roof in rooftop in Greece, where like my business came crashing down, I would say that was one of the pinnacle points where it was starting to be born,
Mm.
because that was when I realized that external success had very little correlation to internal fulfillment, joy, happiness. In reality, like it can be coincidence that the two of them are going in the same direction, and that can happen, but equally doesn't mean that it will. And so that just broke down my whole paradigm, because again, it was one of these things where I knew intellectually, I'd listen to a podcast like this and hear people say, yeah, money doesn't buy happiness, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, money doesn't buy happiness, cool, and move on and go back to like making money, right? But when I actually experienced that, that was when the switch flicked for me. And so when I went on this spiritual journey, this, you know, I'd always been into like self improvement. I'd go to all the Tony Robbins seminars, I'd do all the jumping around, and I'd always been committed to self mastery. And I noticed that that was the thing when people would ask me like, how do you have this business success? It always came down to like, oh, it's this mindset thing, or it's this way I view the world, or it's this internal thing that's the only difference that I can see, because I'm doing the same stuff strategically and business wise that everybody else is doing. Um, and so I realized, like, okay, there's that piece. Also, it's what always lit me up. Like when people would reach out to me and say, "Oh, can I have a call, you know, to help around business?" I'd always be like, uh, you know, sure sometimes, or actually no. But then when they'd ask me about something to do with like the mind or spirituality, I was just instantly lit up. So I always had these signs that that was, you know, more in my path. And for anyone who's, you know, trying to find their like purpose and their path, which I feel like everyone's on that to some degree, that's a really good thing to follow. What's your highest excitement? And that might not be something that instantly leads to money. Like I didn't think this stuff could lead to a business model right back then, but I was just following it because it was what I loved to do. So anyway, going on this journey myself, you know, I built up loads of friends in my space. So I run a marketing agency. I've like lots of friends in the space, and I realized that like everyone was having basically the exact same issues that I were having, where they'd have the external success to some degree, but then it would be inconsistent. Their self worth was tied up in it. They were hustling, grinding. Like I had bald patches on the back of my head from stress.
Mm.
Like, and it was just a very three-dimensional way of approaching business. And so I created Quantum Mind to help like entrepreneurs who are practical guys, you know, just want to like, I think the thing is with entrepreneurship and why I say business is a spiritual game is because to be a successful entrepreneur, you kind of have to become a more virtuous person, right? You've at least got to like make some sacrifices in your life, right? You've got to be providing value in some shape or form. These are all like positive attributes, right? So you're already taking those steps to become maybe a better version of self, which
Mm.
is why I love business in that way. Um, but then I realized a lot of people just kind of didn't have that fire. Like the fire just went out with inside them. They just sort of like they were like me, where they did the business, super fired up, like let's go for a couple of years. Then maybe they achieved what they wanted to achieve, and then it's like, well, now what, right?
Mm.
What's the next step? And so because that mission got lost, the motivation got lost, the fire went out. Or you'd have a bad month in business, and then the whole mental health would come tumbling down, right? They'd question everything. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. So I noticed there are all these just struggles, right, that were happening, and I just basically was like, well, I'm going to figure this out for myself. I've tried every make money online course known to man, and sure, while they might help make a little bit of extra cash, the core issues weren't being fixed. I just couldn't find anything that was a solution for that. So it led me to just saying, all right, I'm just going to try something else. And this is how I ended up in the pyramids. This is how I ended up with plant medicine. This is how like I work with like quantum kinesiologists and all these just completely non-business related things, just because I was following that intuition and that excitement. But what I realized is going on that journey is it can be very chaotic. Actually, it is very chaotic. I'll reframe. And, you know, my whole life had to fall apart for me to figure that out. And so I realized once I'd gone through that, and like always on the journey, but at least I got to a point where I feel like I could actually, you know, people can see the difference in me. um, I decided, yeah, this is actually my calling to help other people go through this, because it's something so many people experience and so many people just don't talk about. They just never ever talk about it. It's just swept under the rug. Just get back to business. So that was where the mastermind was born.
What are some of the most common blocks you see in your clients that you work with?
I would say, oh, it's beautiful because there are so many layers to it, and I love pulling back all of the layers. But a lot of it, it's funny because I would argue that most of it is deep seated within self worth and self love. But then the way that manifests on the surface might be, for example, like, oh, I don't feel like I'm attracting the right clients. Right, I'm getting these clients who are just pain to work with. They don't appreciate what we do. Like they don't pay on time. All of these things, right? Which you might just say, well, those are just business things, right? But actually, they're a complete reflection of self, because business is just a reflection of of you. Particularly if you're running it, like most of my guys are running like online businesses, 1 to 5 people, like they're small businesses, right?
So, like the clients who are not paying them, for example,
Yeah.
how does that reflect to their inner state? What's going on there?
Yeah. So, oh yeah, this just happened with one of my guys. So let me see if I can like recount the story. So I had one guy called Harry, and he basically was really struggling with just consistently being able to book meetings to attract clients. Clients paying on time, and then basically what we realized was that he still was holding on to the belief that like he wasn't able to deliver a good enough service to these clients, right? Like, which was just a reflection of his worth that he could provide in business, which was a reflection of his own internal self-worth, right? And so when we shifted that inside of him and he had the epiphany, he literally, this was the next day, went and booked 4 meetings. One of the clients instantly signed on, and he sent me the email, and I've got it as a screenshot, which said, Harry, we're so excited to start working with you. Our personalities just match perfectly. Like we're essentially on that same vibe. Like, send us the invoice, we want to pay straight away and get the ball rolling. Like, never had that before. right? And there's countless examples of that, right? Where the like another guy, Giacomo, he had a lot of issues with clients paying on time, right? And then once he started shifting his own internal state, right, looking at how is he treating himself, what are the action he's taking, what are the perspectives he's got, where is he judging himself, and just releasing. A lot of it is about releasing attachment, right? That's one of the big things, actually, to answer that question previously. Attachment is a huge thing. Attachment to the outcome, aka wanting the clients. Once that was released, instantly biggest payment comes through ever to the agency. The only thing he shifted was himself internally. Every single strategy remained ceteris paribus, all things held equal. And so the reason why I really like this is because it's bridging the gap between these like spiritual slash slightly more esoteric concepts and real grounded like 3D business stuff, right? And this was, if you come all the way back to the beginning of my story, the internal issue I had was that I couldn't see how these people like watching The Secret were creating a life they wanted, right? And it took me going on this like 10-year journey to figure out, no, actually, like it's all one and the same. And I just feel now I get to bring that to people in a more grounded way.
That's beautiful, man. Ibrahim, it's time for the lightning round.
Oh,
Are you ready?
let's go.
Who or what brings out your wild side?
I'm going to say the moon.
The moon.
Yep.
How so? Just the lunar cycle.
Do I give context on these, or is it like really quick fire?
I'd love context.
Yeah, just I don't know, whenever the moon comes out, I just go kind of wild. Like I feel that really high energy. Like when we were on the beach the other night when the moon was out, like
Was that a full moon or?
it was near a full moon.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I always just feel that high energy and just become like a werewolf.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Have you ever broken the law and didn't get caught? If so, how?
Yes, I have. I was 17 years old. No, I was 16 years old, and I was with an older kid in school who always used to steal like chocolate bars from the sweet shop outside school, and I thought he was the coolest dude. So one day he took me in with him for his operation, and he was like, "Yeah, just put these in your pocket and just walk away." And I was like, I remember feeling like so much fear about it, but I was like, "Oh no, I'm gonna like impress this older kid." And I remember just walking out, giving him half of them for his like mentorship and guidance, and just like strolling home feeling like an absolute like badass.
What did that teach
So, yeah.
you in life?
what did it teach me? I have no idea. To just I don't know, think for myself, probably.
I love how you called it his operation.
Oh yeah, he taught me the whole operation. Like put the sweets in your pocket and walk out. Like I learned the whole system right there.
What's been the biggest lesson in your life this year?
Damn. I would say the biggest lesson is that we all have the ability to create whatever it is we want. It's all within us and nothing outside of us. Like whatever it is that we want, if it's a thought in your mind, it can become a reality because that's how everything's created. And so the question is, how do you get there, and what are the things stopping you from getting there, right? I truly do believe we are capable of creating anything, and then it just comes down to actually like putting in the steps. Before that, I did believe that we all had inherent like limitations inside of us, and now I believe differently.
What changed that perspective for you?
I think definitely like as I've grown, I've been around more inspirational people. I've had more reference experiences to see like people just creating their own reality in real time. And as I've done it myself, and realized like just by shifting my identity and realizing it's so fluid. I mean, it's an illusion anyway from a higher perspective, but by doing that, it's just made me realize anything that I want to create. It just means all I need to do ask is who do I need to become in order to create that, and that's it.
I love that. So it's like an identity shift. Who do I need to become?
Yep. And also whilst realizing that the identity is an illusion anyway.
Right. So the whole framework is actually an illusion, but
Yeah.
you're working within it.
Yep.
So you don't believe in limitations anymore.
No, I don't. I believe that they're all self-imposed, and equally, it's just like, you know, Michael, like anyone. So it's like Michael Jordan plays basketball to a certain level. So that's a possibility, right? To play basketball to that level. Now, do I believe it's likely everyone's going to play basketball to that level? Highly unlikely, but it's possible to play to that level. And so I like to look at things in terms of like possibilities and probabilities, and just then from that point going like, okay, cool. Like if it's possible, then great. I'd much rather believe in possibility than limitation.
Yeah. And I love what you mentioned, that there were certain people that inspired that out of you, like expanders that expanded your way of thinking.
Totally, yeah.
That by seeing them, how they create, it then shifted your perspective on how you can create.
Yes. Yeah. And I've noticed that, okay, another big shift to add to that question is I used to believe like to create, I needed to be the lone wolf. I needed to figure it all out by myself. Like there was this like sadistic glory in being in a dark room behind a monitor, just like, I'm going to just create this thing. And then everyone's going to be like, wow, what were you doing behind that monitor for 2 years, right? And that's nice in a movie. But in reality, like we actually need connection. We're social beings. And as I've developed myself, I've then, opened up and attracted just other cool people, right? And then the more, I've done that, like one of the biggest influences are the people around us, right? Mm-hmm. Because we learn through osmosis. And so the importance of being surrounded by really inspirational people to me is like right up there. I'm very, very discerning about who I choose to spend time with. And typically it's like not a huge group of people. And I'm cool. And it was also coming to the acceptance that for me personally, that's cool. Like I don't need to be, sitting on a different table of people every night to feel like I'm, whatever.
You only need a few great people in your life to really feel fulfilled.
I think it's different for people. I think some people do love that. Like we're going to a dinner tonight with like 8 guys, and that's awesome. I'm super excited for that. Equally, like I don't do that every single night, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a very intentional, orchestrated group.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just me.
Have you ever had any experience with UFOs or aliens?
UFOs, no. Aliens, yes. Depends how you define aliens.
DMT aliens.
DMT
No,
aliens.
5D aliens. Actually, you can define it for me.
Yeah.
What aliens have you encountered?
I've done some work with some certain light beings, through trance channels.
Anything else you can tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean that's open. Like I've had encounters with like 12th dimensional light beings.
Huh. On a channeling sort of trance?
Yeah.
What did they teach you?
I asked them, how can I unlock more self-love? And they reminded me that there were still many areas of myself that I still judged myself and hadn't forgiven myself for, from being a child. And they gave me specific examples of that were true.
So it's like they read your energy and were able to pinpoint examples.
Yep. And I then went back and released them. And that was when it really taught me that the releasement of judgment is a really big part of self-love.
Wow. That's really cool.
I'll put you in touch with them after.
Yeah. I need them on the podcast.
Perfect.
Have you ever stayed up for an entire 24 hours?
Yeah, for sure.
Business? Party?
Partying. The first thing that came to mind was playing RuneScape when I was younger. I just used to play game and just want to get to just level up at life.
Yeah.
then partying, and then probably now, like, last time I did ayahuasca probably was more
Mm.
than 24 hours.
What's the craziest thing you've done in a car?
In a car?
Hmm.
Uh, I probably when I was okay, so this wasn't even in like a supercar, nothing. This was in like an old Toyota. This was in like my first ever car that I drove, which was my parents' previous car. And I was just a boy racer, just driving crazily fast. And I'm not proud of it. I had like five people in the car. I was probably going like 100 and something around a roundabout. And where I had to turn so quickly, the car literally went on two wheels,
Oh
and I
shit.
had to like skid around this roundabout and then come back down. Definitely not proud of that. Apart from that, I would say I've done like some F3 driving, so like Formula 3, so like
Mm.
F1, but like not as like a few levels down. In Silverstone, which is like a racetrack where they use for the Grand Prix in the UK. That was fun.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that was fun.
What three words represent the core essence of who you are?
Hmm. I would say wisdom. Wisdom came up. Say vitality and just child.
Child.
Yeah.
That playfulness.
Yeah, I was actually just saying this to weirdly enough. So I saved these three lines on my notes this morning, which crazily enough, my good friend who you met, had a very similar three lines that he posted on his story, which was so weird. I don't know how this happened, but anyway, it was basically I was saying like I want to have like the wisdom of an elderly man. I want to have like the body of an athlete, like a Greek god, and the like humor of a child.
Hmm.
And just to embody those three qualities is yeah, I think that's cool.
What's one life lesson that you learned from your mom?
From my mum, just to love unconditionally. She taught me through loving me unconditionally. She taught me that love is always there, no matter what. Like there's all through being the physical representation of always having someone to go to, no matter what. Like I know whatever happens, I can go to her. She taught me that unconditional love is always there within myself.
How many times have you been in love?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say definitely different levels of love. I would say five. The latest version of love being with me.
Hmm. I love that.
Yeah,
So the fifth is you.
fifth is me. Yeah.
What is your dream for the planet?
Dream for the planet. I would dream that everybody can live by the qualities of, just loving thy neighbor, being able to act in the intention of love. If we all act with love from that intention, then I believe that basically resolves all of the war, all of the stuff going on. I think it resolves basically all of that. And by the way, that doesn't mean jumping around, skipping unicorns and rainbows. Not that at all. But my dream is that everybody can get to a point where they are healed internally so that they can act from love.
Hmm. What keeps you connected to the world of spirit? Or what is your spiritual practice?
It's many things. The most common daily practice is the practice of releasing and letting go. Because I view that as the essence of the spiritual journey is to continually release and let go, because the more that is done, the more I come back to love.
Hmm. It's beautiful. Final question. What is one piece of advice that you can leave listeners with on how they can lead a more epic life?
Oh, more epic life. Okay. I'm gonna stand on the shoulder of one of my favorite giants, Albert Einstein, and he says, to paraphrase, the only way to influence others is by being yourself. And to expand upon that, if you want to have influence, which can be an extremely positive thing, right? If you want to influence the world in a positive way, it requires knowing thyself first. And then once you know yourself, you can be yourself. You can be who you are. You can fully express your soul, your gift. God can channel through you. Then you can have the impact you want to have on the world.
I love how you say God can channel through you because we're all vessels for the divine.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe in that there's a divine plan for each life?
I do. Yeah, I think we have a soul blueprint. I think we all come here to experience something unique. Now, whether we have free will over that, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but I do believe we all have a unique life path.
Ibrahim, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the pod. Where can people vibe with you?
Probably right now, YouTube and Instagram are the best places to reach me. Just my name, Ebrahim Turner. You can search me up and I'll be there. If you want to see my content, YouTube. If you want to have a chat with me, Instagram.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank you, man.
Dude, thank you. And just want to say you've put together something truly remarkable here. Just from everything from the whole setup to the thought you have and the questions you ask, to just the way you make me feel, open up, like shared so much that I've never shared before. And that's a testament to you and your, what you've created here. So thank you, bro.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the James Xander Trip podcast with Ebrahim Turner. If you enjoyed this conversation, do me a favor and share it with one friend who you think might benefit from this podcast. I put my heart and soul into these episodes, and it would truly mean the world to me if you shared this episode. Please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. You can stay in touch with me through my newsletter at jamesxander.com. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.